Okay, good evening all. I'll call the meeting to order. Welcome to the Monday, June 3rd work session of City Council. Can you start with calling roll, please, Cindy?
Certainly. Mr. Egan?
Here.
Ms. Conley?
Here.
Ms. Downs?
Here.
Ms. Flynn?
Here.
Mr. Snyder's not present. Ms. Underhill? I see Ms. Underhill. Well,
Can you hear us, Justine? I'm not seeing the captions.
She's muted unless she's muted. Cindy, you said Dave's not joining us tonight?
no.
Oh, okay.
All right, well,
Checking one more time, Justine. Also checking on the captions, which were previously working and are not coming up now. So I'm thinking.
Sally, can you hear us, Sally? Okay, sounds like a no, yes. So we'll pause for a moment. Yep. Yeah, but Sally didn't hear us either.
Testing the mic again. I'm not hearing anything even come through here.
Yeah.
That's no.
Yeah, there's nothing on that.
Okay, I'm switching to ceiling mic just for.
The line comes on, like the light comes on, but it's not coming through the speakers.
At all.
Text Justine.
Noise. Oh, the captions are back.
Yeah, put the ceiling mics on as a backup, just so that me can go on while I'm trying to figure this out.
I can hear you all now.
Oh.
Yeah, I couldn't hear you before, but I can hear now.
Until I can troubleshoot this.
Caption. You said you had the ceiling ones on? They're red.
Has Justine's child been born?
This one's green above, is that
What is it? Female
So only one came on.
girl?
We'll let her announce.
Name?
We'll let her announce when she's ready.
All right, so we were doing roll call, and I will come back to Ms. Underhill.
Sorry, I don't have any video feed from you guys. Is that something that would be worked on?
How's that?
I can see you guys now. Yeah.
Good. So Ms. Underhill, I'm going to mark as present. We'll do the virtual motion in a moment.
Here.
Thank you, Council.
Okay, Ms. Underhill, can you identify your remote location and reason for participation by electronic means?
I am located in Falls Church, Virginia, and I'm participating remotely for medical reasons.
Okay, I move that City Council approve electronic participation by Councilmember Underhill in this meeting as pursuant to the City Council's adopted policy.
Second.
Ms. Downs on the second. Mr. Reagan?
Yes.
Connolly? Yes. Downs?
Yes.
Flynn?
Yes.
Snyder's not here. Hardy? Yes. Welcome, thank you for joining us.
Thank
You may deposit and work for the stream is fine too.
I'm checking in right now. I really couldn't see what the issue is with the mics. I'm not sure. But the stream is hearing it and they can hear through this on Teams, so.
Justine, you can hear us okay through the ceiling mics?
Yes, I can hear you guys just fine.
Okay. Let's jump in right in then.
Right, so our first item are the Chesapeake Bay related comp plan amendment and code amendments. And I'd like to invite Emily Bazemore and Bahia Keeflight up to the table. And I think we'll give a unified presentation of both at the same time. And then look forward to questions or comments from City Council. The request is to schedule this for first reading at your June 8th regular council.
All right, good evening Council. Tonight, Council is requested to hold a work session to review draft amendments to Chapter 5 of the city's comprehensive plan, Environment for Everyone, Environmental Sustainability, Resilience, and Natural Resources. The draft amendments incorporate maps and narratives required by the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act and its regulations, which were prompted by a recent review of the city's Chesapeake Bay program with the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. They represent a set of minor technical modifications the city is undertaking following that review. On May 11th, the City Council adopted Initiating Resolution 2026-13. This initiating resolution detailed that the required maps and narratives related to the CBPA will be included in the amendment. The resolution also indicated that formatting will be updated throughout the chapter to enhance overall accessibility, and that clerical updates will be made accordingly if they can be completed without impacting the current schedule. Tonight's recommendation is that scheduling for referral of TR 26-18 to the Planning Commission at the June 8, 2026 action meeting happens, and also setting a public hearing for July 13th, 2026. I'm going to go over to the staff analysis section really quick. Okay, so starting at line 40. So to address the deficiencies identified by DEQ, the comprehensive plan will need to be amended to include the following, and you'll see in the draft that it does. So number one, a CBPA map showing both RPA areas and RMA areas, so resource protection areas and resource management areas within city limits. This is on page 57 of the draft. Number two, a narrative and a map that describes and depicts areas of the city that exhibit physical constraints to development, such as steep slopes, highly erodible soils, and areas prone to flooding. This is on page 48. Number three, a narrative and corresponding map that describes and depicts areas of the city with known stream and erosion issues. This is on page 54. Then number four, a narrative and corresponding map of the existing and potential water pollution sources. This is on page 59 and 68. So again, Chapter 5 is being amended to address these different maps and narratives. We've also incorporated those formatting updates and also some light clerical updates throughout the chapter that was previously adopted in February 2020. I'm briefly going to touch on our timeline. So we did visit City Council for a work session on May 4th. And then we had that action on the initiating resolution the following week on May 11th. And now we're here for a work session to look at those draft amendments on June 1st. And we'll be returning on June 8th, which is next Monday, to get a referral to Planning Commission. And then we're set for action in mid-July. So now I'm going to turn it over to Bahayu, and then following Bahayu's staff report, we'll go Q&A. Thank you.
Good evening. I'd like to have during the City Council. My name is Bahayu Krim, I'm a staff officer with Somato Engineer. Tonight, we are requesting ordinance amendment.
Sound is now joining.
TR 2608 ordinance amendment chapter 35 of Somato, article 1 of Somato management, section 35 to definition, also section 35 square water quality impact assessment, section 35 4C of the code of City of Falls Church, TR 2609 ordinance amendment to code of City of Falls Church, Virginia chapter 36 division. Article 2 requirement for plants, and section 38 preliminary and final plat requirement. Also, TO 2016 ordinance amending the code of City of Falls Church, Virginia chapter 48 zoning. Article V supplementary regulation division 7 site plan section 48 1134
Sound is now exiting.
Act and also section 48 11 preliminary site development and also section 48, 1137 required information, section 48, 1141 consideration and division, 8 landscaping, section 48, 79 intent and objective, and also some tree canopy covering to correct some typos. So tonight, council is requested to consider the proposed amendment to chapter 35, section 35.2 definition, section 35.12 water quality impact assessment, section 35.40 fee, and chapter 38 requirement for plants, section 38, 34 general requirement, and also chapter 48 site plan, section 48, 1134 when required. So, staff is recommending scheduling first reading of the 2608, 2609, and 2610 for June 8, 2026. We are also requesting referral for 2609 and 2610, chapter 38 and 48. There's some background information about the Chesapeake Bay, General Chesapeake Bay, divided into RPA and resource protection area. There is also a definition of water quality impact assessment. It's generally required technical. It's a general technical document under the Virginia Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act regulation that evaluates the potential impact of proposed land development. So there is also a map showing the location of RPAs in the city of Falls Church. So recently DEQ Chesapeake did the Chesapeake Bay audit, which is typically on a 5-year schedule. So they did the audit between July 12 and 2024 and April 2025. So we have the corrective action agreement, and we agreed to address the identified deficiencies by August 31, 2026. So there are key provisions proposed for amendment. The chapter 35 is to add a definition for plan review process. Generally, the process of the development review process is already included in chapter 35, section 35 for erosion and sediment control management for land surrounds above 2,500 square foot, and in section 35.12 for land surrounds in the RPA. So the process is already included in the amendment, so we agree with DEQ to include only the definition for plan review. But the plan of review process is already included in section 35 or in section 35.12. And the other amendment we are requesting is removal of agreement in the of referencing for water quality impact assessment. So the water quality impact assessment is required for all land disturbance, but our code refers to provide agreement in lieu in replacing water quality assessment. In my time with the city, we have never replaced that, but the DEQ regulation doesn't allow to agreement in lieu in replacement of water quality impact assessment. So we are proposing to remove that section, and the other one we are proposing is not mandatory, but we are recommending for referencing the stormwater code, stormwater management fee, which is set by the states. The reason is starting from this July, the state is updating their code, their fee code, and changing every year to reflect the CPI. So instead of updating every year, we are recommending to reference the state code. This is to easy our process every year. Come to the council or are requesting the fee change every year, so we are recommending to refer it. The other one we are requesting to amend chapter 38. This is mandatory based on the DEQ update. Additional requirement is for the depiction of resource protection area and resource management area boundaries and rotation on plans as well as site plans. So on this one, we are requiring to add a language in chapter 38 to require the depiction of resource protection map area on the plans. But the site plan is already included in chapter 48, so we are not requiring any amendment in chapter 48 to depict the resource protection area and resource management area in the site plan. So the reason why we are DEQ is requesting for depiction of plant, the resource protection area on the plant is the document that came with the property. So we are trying to provide resource protection area or environmental constraints on the plant that came with the property. The other one we are requesting to amend the chapter 48, which is zoning. Like I said, the site plan depiction of the resource protection area is already included, but we are trying to clarify the threshold for 2,500 square feet of land disturbance. The language currently says exceeding, but we are trying to clarify the disturbance by putting greater than or equal to clarify or to give more clarification for engineers and property owners. So those are the three changes we are requesting. The timeline for this is the same as the timeline for the camp line. I will try to follow the same timeline. There is no physical impact, and that will be all. And if you have any questions, and
Great, thank you. Before I open for questions and comments, are we good on the audio? Because I got a text that on Teams, it's really hard to hear us. So that's,
I was gonna jump in on the Q&A and just say, can everyone start using the table mics again as well? We're gonna try using both so that Teams can hear us and Cable can hear us better, and then I'll take feedback if there's any kind of echo on Cable.
okay. So everyone have table mics on all the time, and when you're talking in, pick up.
We probably need to project our voices maybe a little bit more for the roof mic.
Okay. Thank you, Emily and Mahalo. I know that we were planning on mainly making changes to conform
with the compliance requirements for Just Play. But I noticed that throughout the comp plan, we also
made a few other tweaks as well. Are we taking feedback on those other red line edits as well?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
So that, who's got questions or comments?
I was looking at the map for the streets, thinking about how that compared to Lincoln water versions.
I was just wondering if these have been synced up completely with what we're doing with Greening of Lincoln. Because we've got three major stormwater pipes. And it almost seems like one of them is missing from the map.
So the RPA is only open streams, it's not in the RPA map. Is that correct, Mr. Keithley?
Yes. But this is the watershed that shows pipe streams.
So you're not going to even if it's not RPA.
It's still on the map in the top
plan.
plan. I feel like there's a pipe stream, a pipe missing. I'll make sure we have it correct.
Are you referring the streams map?
On page 54.
Yeah. This was made with our earlier, so we can do that comparison and just take a look to make sure that we're not missing anything.
Okay. I don't want to confuse myself. It's a little incorporated. That was my main thing, really. That was like a big thing I noticed.
Thank you.
Any other
Feedback
feedback?
on either chapter 5 of the comp plan or the code
Changes that I can talk through.
Question on the process. I know we're referring out to the planning commission next week. Does it need referring out to the ESC as well,
Given that
it's the environment chapter?
Yeah, so my thought process was doing a digital distribution and sending it through their liaison, so they can take a look and review and if they have any comments. But because this one is kind of on that tight timeline, we're hoping to go for action in July. I have it just going to the planning commission, but the ESC liaison is in the loop about us working on the chapter update.
Yeah, similarly, the RPA issues tend to come up in the urban forestry kind of parts of the code too, and so in our last meeting, because this is on council schedule, I kind of walked through what this was about, and it makes sense if you're doing digital distribution to also include Charles, so that it goes to Amy Crompton, even if it's not part of their July, I guess June agenda.
Okay, yeah, we can do that distribution to both urban forestry and the environmental sustainability committee.
Now, I know we aspire to update our chapters every 10 years. Is that the process? Yeah, 45. So does this count? Because I guess this was last time in 2020. I have vague recollections of touching this one in 2020. Maybe it was a blur during COVID, maybe. But does this count as a 5-year update, or we can still do for a bigger update of this chapter?
I mean, we've taken a look at this holistically with the clerical updates, but I think any larger update of the chapter would have to just, be part of like a separate process, and I think that's more up to council if we embark on that. Yeah.
So in that spirit, I did jot down a few things that we've done since 2020 that if we have time and only if we have the data available, just that Meredith, since we were touching, and I did see red line edits. I think it was on page 26
when I actually talked about the acreage for development between 2000 and 2015. We touched 34 acres, and there were still 187 acres of commercial space. I feel like we had that number updated at some point, because we know the 4 projects since 2015 might touch it.
So if it's easy, that might be an easy thing to update. Because I often hear that there are concerns that we should run out of space for development. That was a good reminder that once done analysis, that was not the case. Second, we've done solid waste changes, and thought that might merit a quick mention. How we now curbside composting across the city and change the fee structure. Tree canopy, I know we updated to reflect 10% in there. I noted that. But if we have new tree canopy data for the last round of updates.
Yes, I will say as part of this, we are looking at just that number that's in there for tree canopy, and I need to take a look at the COG numbers and do a comparison. So I'm going to meet with Charles on that.
Great. And then also, likewise, when talking about commercial development, I feel like planning brought to us, as part of the tree canopy discussion, the residential turnover acreage data. And so I felt like, given that we already had done the work, that would be an easy addition into this comp plan chapter. It felt like a natural fit on page 26 when we talk about commercial acreage changing the environment.
So only
in the spirit of, if you have time, if it fits on schedule, those are things that jumped out at me, because I know we've done some things since 2020.
Yeah, that sounds great, and we can take a look at all of those different things. Thank you.
Great. Any other final comments on
either the code or chapter 5?
See you next week.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Texas, I guess it's should be probably should tell us.
So these have just stopped working. That's what they're saying in the back. This is not even feeding into the audio. So the light's coming on, but these do not work. So I'm not sure. Should we just have a quick recess while we?
Yeah, it was 5 minutes, and see what we can do.
at least in the bedroom.
They're working in a room, but
Sorry, copy.
oh, because they conflict with the.
I'm not sure if it's coming in and out or.
Yeah, we usually try not to have both on. Sally, can you give me an audio check how you're hearing us on Teams?
I've just muted the ceiling mics
Oh.
too, and it looks like it's, so now the mics are working again.
I could hear you very clearly, Cindy, but the meeting thus far has been very garbled.
All right, thank you. Maybe taking the ceiling mics back off.
Yeah, I've just done.
The
So-
priority is to make sure the council members can hear and.
Yep, it seems like it just suddenly switched back on.
I can hear much more clearly now.
Okay, well, if result is up, I really don't know what happened there.
But that probably, will that mean that the streaming folks are not going to be able to hear if we're, because that's why you,
Back on, they will be able to hear way more
Okay.
clearly as well.
okay.
Yep. Okay, I'll keep an eye on it.
So we think we're good on streaming on all the channels? Okay. Okay, well, let's continue on then. I'm sure we'll hear otherwise if it's not working from people. Great, let's jump into Virginia Village now.
All right, Mr. Trainer. So we, tonight, we have a work session to talk about the draft RFP. We've circulated version 3 that was in the packet, and we'd like to go through with particular focus on Section 3 and Section 5. Section 3 is where we articulate our policy goals, and Section 5 is where we establish the selection criteria. Before we jump in, I will just note that we will be with the Planning Commission on Wednesday night to talk about the comp plan amendment, the small area plan amendment, and we'll be discussing zoning with the Planning Commission as well, following the initiating resolution that the City Council adopted. And that's not really their focus at this work session tonight, but if there are questions about that, we'd be happy to answer. We will have a deep dive on those matters at your work session on June 15th before our request for action by the City Council on June 22nd, where the City Council would act on first reading on the zoning text language as well as the comp plan and the small area plan, as well as grant authorization to release the RFP. And so, as we discussed at your last meeting, then the big schedule is that the comp plan and sort of the planning documents would be worked on through the month of July and come back to council for action on July 27th. At the end of July, the zoning text language, however, would go on a slower pace, and second reading on that would be scheduled in September or October. And so with that sort of kind of overview of the schedule, we'll jump into the RFP if the council is ready for that.
I just want to ask a question before we get in there, which is the ESC sent an email last Thursday or Friday, and I think that those comments have not been incorporated.
That's correct.
And I'm not quite sure where they'll fit in with what we have here, but one of the things the ESC said is that throughout there it mentions biophilic standards and Energy Star standards, and those are all outdated and not really the right kind of standards. So I just want to make sure we include that in the conversation tonight.
So we are kind of onboarding the ESC's
Yeah.
comments, and I think as we go through the policy requirements and the grading, because it is referenced right now.
Right.
The ESC input is not yet referenced, but I think those would be the places to possibly expand or phrase differently based on the council's direction.
Okay, thanks.
So, Mayor, maybe I could hit some of the highlights of Section 3 and just kind of get ourselves oriented. There are some changes since the last time the council reviewed it. And so let me just sort of describe it at a high level first. So Section 3, City of Falls Church policy goals and requirements. And so the mandatory requirements are that the proposals consider the financial feasibility of 3 potential scenarios, and we'll talk about those in just a moment because they've changed since the last time they were discussed. and identify and ask the developer, the proposer, to also identify the preferred scenario that they believe best achieves the city's affordable housing objectives in a fiscally responsible manner. And so we are asking them to think seriously about all of these scenarios. And the purpose of that is not to short circuit to one solution, but to really have them go through a thought process for a scenario A, where the existing housing stock in Virginia Village is kept and potentially expanded with a third floor or with bump outs, but more modest changes, but the core of those structures would remain in place. The renovation would be required, and we've set the standard on the national standards that are put forward by HUD through their Inspire standards for affordable housing. It calls for stable rents for current tenants, and then there's a rent structure, a preferred rent structure that's described that's the same for all three scenarios. And we'll go into more detail on those in just a moment. We do note the environmental assessments, and so we would provide the respondents all the information that we have. In the last version that you saw, we listed out sort of our summary of those reports. Instead, we're just going to make all the reports available to respondents as opposed to air characterization of those reports. So that's scenario A. Scenario B is a what we call low-density infill development.
And why,
scenario.
so that people who aren't paying as much attention, scenario A originally was a no-build one.
That was
where
just
there was no expansion.
No expansion, just preservation.
Could you
And
speak to why that was changed from no-build to some sort of small additions?
So our thought is, the city is explicit that one of our goals is to preserve and to expand affordable housing. And so not having that expansion option in scenario A, we felt the council's feedback was that seemed to really handicap scenario A, that it wasn't a realistic proposal. And so by having the expansion, it makes it kind of more on equal footing because it will meet, to some extent, city affordable housing goals with the expansion.
Yeah.
So it gives that more viability from a policy perspective. So scenario B, low-density infill development, which would involve the demolition of the existing city-owned buildings and a rebuild. And so the low-rise residential development is described as 3 to 4 stories in height. And then paragraph 2 lays out the stable rent requirement for current tenants, and then the target rent scenarios that are described a bit more in section 4 below. The value of pedestrian accessibility through the site is noted so that people can maintain their access to Big Chimneys Park from Maple and just have perviousness through the site. It does here reference biophilic design elements, so I think there's opportunities here, I think, to layer in a bit more detail that the ESC has provided. And the ESC, the examples they've given are taken from other affordable housing projects in the region, and so we think it's helpful input. Scenario B, being responsive to the goals and objectives and policies in the affordable living policy, delivering a mixed income community that balances various housing typologies to meet rental and ownership needs across the 10 lots involved in this RFP. So ensure committed affordable units range in affordability that captures renters earning between 30 and 80% AMI. A minimum of 30% of the total new units are affordable to households earning 50% of AMI, and most of the 80% AMI units are larger, i.e. 2-bedroom units that can accommodate larger size households. So those are the 3 ways that we're articulating our housing goals in scenario B. Then in scenario C, which we characterize as the larger infill redevelopment, also involving the demolition of the existing city-owned buildings. And so height, density, and neighborhood compatibility. So that is described as vegetation, shade trees, and other biophilic design elements shall be utilized to screen Virginia Village site from its boundary with the adjacent Winter Hill community and Big Chimneys Park, ensuring an initial building-free zone measuring 25 feet from the common property line.
Similar treatment should be applied to the boundary with the adjacent tax analyst building, Bowl American site, and other interior Virginia Village lots with a building-free zone of 15 feet on those edges. Beyond this green buffer, building height should step down towards the Winter Hill community and Big Chimneys Park to achieve better transitions. Building heights closest to these edge conditions may only gradually increase in height without exceeding a 45-degree bulk plane angle as measured from the point where the common property line meets the grade elevation. We've shown in prior meetings graphics to illustrate this, and this is what the Planning Commission is going to be reviewing on Wednesday night as well. Height transitions along the boundary with the adjacent tax analyst building, Bowl American site, and other Virginia Village interior lights can be more flexible, so that that's sort of that angle. There could be some flexibility on those adjacencies. And then paragraph Romanet 3, portions of the site along Shirley and Maple can reach 5 to 7 stories in height, with the greatest heights concentrated along Maple Avenue and adjacent to the Bowl America site. Any portion of new building exceeding 40 feet in height shall provide a minimum 10-foot step back along boundaries adjacent to residential districts. So at 40 feet, there's a 10-foot step back. And then B, there's a discussion of open space. Pedestrian accessibility should be prioritized. Introducing new trails or pathways with access between Maple Avenue, the Virginia Village site, and Big Chimneys Park. Wayfinding signage, lighting, biophilic design elements should be incorporated to make the site more porous and inviting to the public. Ground floor uses, redevelopment should prioritize the most feasible combination of residential supporting uses that include some combination of daycare, supportive housing services, civic spaces that help celebrate and activate the adjacent Tenor Hill Historic District and Cultural District. So that's taken from our town hall meetings the input that we've gotten from those meetings. And then 2, the project is responsive to the goals and objectives of the affordable living policy. And so the same description that we just read in the prior section, affordability between 30 and 80%. 30% of the total new units are affordable at 50% of AMI, and that most of the 80% AMIs are 2-bedroom. Now, so those are the 3 scenarios, and then we do allow hybrid scenarios where respondents can combine the scenarios of A, B, and C across the site. So there's an example of a renovation of several of the existing quadplexes while demolishing and redeveloping others with new construction. Respondents proposing a hybrid approach should clearly delineate which parcels are subject to which scenario and provide a cohesive site-wide plan. And then also, if the respondents don't think that any of the scenarios are viable, we'd like to know why, so that we can learn and then go forward.
So, real quick question.
Mm-hmm.
So we're expecting a developer to give us a proposal that incorporates one or a mix of one of these, but they don't have to say, all right, I don't like scenario B. They just pick what they want, unless they're giving us nothing.
So our thought process in drafting, yes, is that
Okay.
when we were having the community meetings, we heard opinions about these different scenarios. Right. And so we thought it would be helpful through the assessment that the developers haven't just gone straight to what they want to do, but we've required them to think through some of the options that the community came to us with.
That makes sense. Okay. But they don't have to do every option.
They should tell us what they think is the feasible one.
What they think
the
is the most feasible.
And that'll be just information that then we'll process and kind of make our own decisions on. But
okay.
Yeah. Right. And I would imagine some may say, here's a pros and cons of scenario A, pros and cons. You know, they may come and say, this one might be more affordable to the city. This might, you know, it'll be interesting to see if
here's what's financeable, here's what's not financeable, here's, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds like we're ready to jump, but before we jump into the RFP itself, Wyatt, kind of taking a step back, because I think I'm reflecting on the past two discussions where we're talking about where we are making decisions. And so I think tonight is one of two work sessions with a goal of releasing the RFP on June 22nd. After that point, if you give us like the big picture overview of where we still have additional decision-making authority along the way, all the way up till next March, essentially. I think that'll help frame this discussion so people understand when they're still making decisions on things.
So it's an important point. So how does the city council sort of keep control over this process? What are your key decision points? So first, you'll hear the recommendation of the evaluation committee. And then so one important decision is choosing the top ranked respondent and having an interim agreement with that entity. And then setting the final zoning for the site. Now, staff is proposing a by right zoning structure. Council ultimately will decide whether you want that or not, but we are proposing that. And so there's been some questions. Does that mean the city council will give up control? And so what I would submit is that once you have an interim agreement with your top ranked respondent, you have not finalized the zoning at that point. And so there will be probably some give and take at that point. The council could say, this is it, you have to fit this. Or there could be some push and pull, and the council could say, well, this is a little different than what we thought, but you've handled it nicely, so we're going to approve that, and because we like your concept. So the council will have that ability up through setting the zoning. And then ultimately, the last big decision point would be the comprehensive agreement. So the interim agreement survives through the period where they're getting their site plan, getting their financing, and putting in their applications for financing. At that point, then the city council, there is still one final decision, which is the comprehensive agreement, where the whole package is put together. And so that would be sort of the last touching point and sort of the ultimate decision on the project.
So to recap, June 22nd, we get to decide whether we're releasing the RFP. September, we will hear from, it's not called the selection committee anymore, so I noted the name change. It's the Evaluation Advisory Committee, the EAC, so that they're advising us, they're not actually selecting. So in September, we get to actually select any of the respondents that we like. And then in October, which is when second reading of the zoning changes, that's where we get to decide what the final zoning is.
That's right.
And then the comprehensive agreement, which is maybe late 2025 or 2026 or early 2027, will be the final.
Yeah, February 2027 would be, I think, a reasonable time period for the comprehensive agreement.
Can I make a request of the city attorney as we talk about this? And I would just like to understand, so we're talking about this and like, oh, council has this, that, or the other, but we're also putting out an RFP, getting people to invest and spend time and resources, putting together proposals, entering into some interim agreement, should council select someone. And I would just like to understand, like, what counts as a contract when, and what risk and liability is there to the city at what points in time based on the submissions that respondents have made to whatever we've signaled our intent to be, and what we're on the hook for or not on the hook for when we sort of talk about discretion that we have, but discretion that we may not have based on like what we view as a contract and not a contract, and what's a breach of a contract at what points in time. So I would like to understand the legal aspects and ramifications of what it is we are kind of talking about in terms of decision points, but also like binding commitment letters and interim agreement letters and negotiated agreements, because they're like they have more force than what I think we are making them out to have. And I think we need to understand from a negotiation position when we have leverage and when we don't have leverage, based on contractual obligations we may or may not have, based on how certain agreements are structured.
So it's
understood.
Yeah. I've got a few thoughts on that, and then ultimately the city attorney is your most reliable speaker to it. I would say this, in any agreement, there are always default provisions, and there are always a way that the parties can separate. And so an interim agreement would have those provisions in it. In this RFP, you'll notice it says the city may choose to select no respondent. So we've,
We've protected ourselves that way.
we are clear about that. At the comprehensive agreement, that's an important point because that's when we would transfer title to the selected team, either through a ground lease or through a fee simple sale. And so that's an important point. But still, there's default provisions that can survive after that. And so those are all things that get worked out with our legal teams. But those are a couple of thoughts on it.
And then I can ask the question now or I can ask the question later. I would still like to understand the EAC versus council. I understand we ultimately are making a decision as to the respondent or to the ranked respondent, but it's not clear to me based on the RFP language that's actually in the document as to the EAC sort of going through the whittling process of the respondents. And then when we get to kind of numbers 10 and 11, the respondent submitted the most advantageous responsive proposal will be chosen by the panel, so the EAC. This is Section 5 evaluation process, paragraph 11, and recommended to the city council who will make the final determination. So it's not clear to me in number 11. Is the panel selecting a project, basically? They're selecting more than a partner. They're seemingly selecting a project based on like the RFP. It's a single project that's coming down to us and council has an up or down vote as to the project, or what is council's role relative to other submissions at this point in time? So like that aspect of EAC versus council in terms of the spectrum of projects we're as a council evaluating, I still have questions on, just based on the language in the document.
So we can do some refinement on the language. What I would describe as the process is that the EAC will be doing its work in closed session. The responses themselves, we're going to do some work with JLL in terms of what's normal. For instance, for West Falls, the summaries were public. The proprietary information, like what they were planning to build and their financing model, was protected. I think it's going to be something similar to that. The EAC would do their work behind closed doors, give their recommendation to the city council also in closed session. The way that the city council, you can tell an entity, hey, you're our top ranked respondent. We'd now like to sit down with you and work out an interim agreement. But the act of picking the top ranked respondent is the approval of the interim agreement. So that interim agreement can spell out as much as or as little as you want it to spell out. It could be that the council says, we like the team, but we're not going to commit them to the project because we want to change what their concept is. That you could do that. Or the interim agreement could say, we're picking you, and you're going to deliver X, Y, and Z because that's what your proposal said. That's the way we would hope it would be, and that's the way I would anticipate it would be. But that interim agreement, you have some flexibility in how it's structured.
I think part of what Aaron is seeing is some of the changes that have been made in Section 3 haven't filtered all the way down through the rest of the document. For example, I was glad to see we took the 100,000 out because we want, we want to subsidize, keep our subsidy as small as possible, but tell us what it's going to take. And then in the selection criteria, it still has the 100,000. I think that's just case of it filtering all the way through as the changes are made. And I think, Aaron, you may be seeing some of that as well with the evaluation. So we need to make sure that is cleaned up.
That's right.
Yes. Yeah, I think there are inconsistencies, and I'm happy to help identify inconsistencies or give a marked up scanned version or whatever, send it out. But
if I could summarize, I think what I'm hearing is some.
No, it's a question, Letty. It's a question about, it's not a summary. It's a question for the city manager about what it is that comes to council. Do we see 3 plans, or do we see a plan that it's an up and down vote on? And I still am not clear as to the answer, because you're talking about a team and what we can ask the team to do.
So what I would, here's what I'm used to, is that the EAC would give a report. Here's all our responses. Here's our matrix of how we evaluated the responses. Here's kind of our work product. And so you would see all of them, and you'd also get the findings of the EAC and a recommendation by the EAC.
That was what I was going to say, is that for those of us who were around with West Falls, we got to essentially see the homework of the selection committee. We could decide we like and agree with the recommendations, we not, and we ultimately voted on it. So I think Mary Beth and I are kind of familiar. I have some deja vu from how this went with West Falls, where we had a similar kind of committee and a much, much more daunting and complicated project. We ultimately can make a different recommendation decision than what the selection or the advisory committee can do. But I think what I'm hearing, what I was trying to summarize, is that I'm hearing the desire to go be able to see all the recommendations that come through and see why the EAC is coming up with that recommendation. Again, we can have the discretion to agree or not agree, but I guess confirming that council will have the ability to be read into those details, I think, is what I'm trying to hear.
Not that I need to see 6 proposals, it's that I want the public to understand what the process is. And I don't think it's clear from this document what the process is for the public to know in a by right development what the EAC's role is versus the council's role with respect to one or more projects.
Can I just add something there too, just based upon my past experience with West Falls? The projects came in, council, there was a lot of opportunity to hash it out. We like this one for this reason and this one for this reason, and this is what the committee recommended. And because there were details that were made public, it was open to the community understood we had this project and we had this project, not all the details that we were hashing out, but there was hashing out. It wasn't just, okay, thank you. Great, you made your recommendation, we'll go with that. It was definitely the council trying to understand it, and then definitely the staff sharing what they could share so people could see it. That was my expectation of how this would look.
Yeah, we even had public meetings, I think.
Yeah, we had public meetings where they presented, and they didn't love that part, but they did it.
Yeah, so there, the top 2 were given the opportunity to make a public presentation. And they could choose, since it was them being the communicator, they could choose how much business proprietary information they wish to share.
Can we, I guess, set that expectation, or at least vet that with JLL? Say, does that seem like it would be appropriate in this project and process that we expect whoever bids, that there will be a public-ish discussion of their proposals, at least the part that's not proprietary? And maybe that would allay some of the concerns.
I think some more clarity on that process is the request tonight, and we can provide that, including that question.
And I think we should be asking the developer if there are specific items that they consider very proprietary, they should flag those, and those should be the exception. But if there are things that they would be really upset if we put out public, they should be telling us up front.
Yeah, I think the risk that, our procurement staff kind of don't like the public element of it, because there's a risk that the top-ranked respondent takes some of the ideas from someone who doesn't get doesn't get selected, and they would say that that's not fair, and maybe have a cause of action. So that's the thing to balance.
Mm-hmm. And that might be part of we don't go public with anything until we have everybody's bids, so that they can't poach what other people have done. But once you're past that point, that's something to work out, and what can we legally do, and procurement would be okay with. But I think it sets the expectations with the developer that certain parts will get shared, and they should expect that, but it won't be shared until a certain point in time, until we're past the evaluation and the evaluation committee has made their determination, and then maybe stuff might be out there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
It would be okay if I ask. So I had a question, more content, not as much process on this one. So I just wanted to make sure I'm understanding on page 15, it's under scenario C, and you read through it, Wyatt, where you talked about portions of the site located along Shirley Street and Maple Avenue can reach 5 to 7 stories in height, with the greatest heights concentrated along Maple Avenue. But I was curious, I guess, is that and I was trying to figure out north, south, east, west, but is that the east side of Shirley that's closer to Maple, or are we talking about both sides of Shirley?
Since Jack is sort of working the land use side of it.
Yeah, I know. But Shirley's, I'm saying like, because the other side of Shirley is the one that bumps up to Winter Hill.
No, Shirley's up top with, isn't Shirley the one that's against the bowling alley?
No, that's Gibson.
All right, my mistake, sorry.
So my point is like, is this, to me, when I read this, it makes it seem like you could put a 7-story something on the side of Shirley that's closest to Winter Hill. Am I reading that correct? I thought we were talking about something that was a little bit lower on that side of Shirley.
So, Jack, would you like to describe that?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, the intention is to have, and I think the RFP says specifically, yeah, well, I guess it includes Maple Avenue and Shirley, but the way that the feedback that we've heard is certainly the intention that the tallest parts of the building will be closer to Maple Avenue in front that, and along Gibson Street, Bowl America, that doesn't have those kind of negative effects on residential districts. So that, I think that's part of the zoning piece that'll push the higher highs and more intense development towards South Maple.
Okay, so you think the zoning piece would, I just didn't know if, to be a little bit clearer, if we said something like, again, I don't know which side, I think that's or whichever, east or whatever, but however, north, south, I don't know which direction it is, but I don't know if you want to say something that says something like, with the understanding that this side of Shirley is adjacent to another community, and so, something like that. Because to me, again, like when I'm just reading this, I'm thinking, now again, I don't know, the zoning piece I know is something separate, but I just think like, oh, okay, both sides of Shirley, we can build 7-story things, which seemed off to me, so.
There'll be key nuances in the zoning ordinance that,
That would
develops those
handle it.
caveats when you're, within so many feet of residential district, or, those kind of levers that achieve, the vision here. That might not be, that level of detail might not be as appropriate in RFP document.
Okay,
per se.
I understand. Thank you.
And I have some content ones, but to your comment about the zoning versus the RFP, obviously some of the elements in the RFP are really coming out of the zoning, and we don't have that yet. And so I'm still worried about that we're getting ahead of it. I think it'd be important for us to know what are the elements within this RFP that are being driven by zoning, and which ones are really RFP issues. An example of something I still have trouble finding is we've talked about flexibility with the reconfiguration of the right-of-ways and the roads. I don't see that being a zoning thing at all. It's something we probably want to give the developer that option to be flexible and innovative. But that's an example of something not zoning, RFP, but then we're talking about base angle or bulk angles and 5 to 7, and to me that's clearly coming out of the zoning. And so I think it's very important for us to know what elements here are coming out of the zoning and what elements are RFP specific. And I can't tell.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, there'll be, the zoning will be in a way, so the RFP will be obviously kind of more specific in some things and less in others. But zoning generally, right, defines the box that you can form development in. And so there are specific things in the draft that went out for the Planning Commission on bulk angle and when that applies, and when step backs and setbacks apply based on your geographic position, if you're relative to a residential district, things like that. But the RFP is, I think, meant to be more generic in some ways because we want to see what some of that creativity we get back is. And so I think that kind of goes back to the tandem schedule idea where, we have our kind of North Star ideas that we heard from the community, and that's, proper transitions and setbacks, buffers, higher highs and more intensity towards South Maple Avenue. We know that the zoning has to capture that. And so we can at least kind of put those concepts, those ideas in the RFP without getting too prescriptive that we might eliminate creative things that fit within those North Star ideas that we get back that we hadn't thought of yet, things that maybe the zoning doesn't even address. And so I think that's part of the idea for the schedule, but also how those two pieces work together. Does that help paint a better picture?
Yeah, I think it'd just be helpful, maybe in the next version, just items that are identical to what's in the zoning, or basically the zoning being brought over, just put them in a different color or something simple like that. And we're just talking about during the draft process so that when it goes out there, obviously they would be cleared out. But I think it's helpful to understand, not just us, but the community as a whole, to say, okay, this is stuff that's being fed from the new zoning. These are things that are really RFP specific.
Could I just briefly interject? I think the thing that's important for the community to understand is that their input's actually feeding into the RFP and then feeding into the zoning draft changes.
See, that should be the reverse.
Well, I
It
think
should be
people,
feeding into the zoning, which then feeds into the RFP.
which
That's
we realize
the
is
key.
going kind of parallel.
They're
but I
parallel, but I think that's a very important
But I think
distinction.
the point that Jack's made, though, that I heard is that the North Stars that we'd heard from the community, the guardrails, right? How high, how big, the setbacks, those are things that are in parallel getting reflected in the comp plan, the small area plan, and then the RFP and the zoning changes. And so they're all consistent. I mean, we can color code them, but I imagine that what the Planning Commission is seeing on Wednesday night will show 5 to 7 stories, highest density on South Maple, make sure you taper back 25 feet, 10-foot step backs. All the numbers essentially is what's going to be in the zoning ordinance that's being proposed. If the Planning Commission has alternative recommendations, I imagine we would then update this RFP before we release it on June 22nd.
Could I have clarification as to whether the North Star is the 4 meetings or whether the North Star currently encompasses all the public comment we've received? Because to me, we kind of talk about the North Star of like the zoning and the RFP, like we keep going back to, well, we heard this in the meetings, right? And I'm not going to get into the weeds of like deduping the numbers and who's city council versus housing versus planning commission and how many actual residents were at the meetings versus the public comment that we've received, because I think we've gotten now a large cross-section and it points, right? Like there are definitely themes, right? And I understand capturing the themes as we are, but to kind of consistently say, oh, well, like the North Star is 7 stories. I'm not sure, like I have heard a North Star of 7 stories based on the full scope of public comment at this point in time.
So, I mean, ultimately, I mean, so the exercise was to help determine some of these things, right? Those meetings. And we continue to get feedback on those ideas. So another thing that's running with the zoning is the small area plan text amendments, and those have not been those have been drafted as draft amendments that'll help kind of define that vision that the zoning will ultimately develop the foundation for, the scaffolding. But even those, the text amendments haven't been adopted yet, right? So I think all this input we continue to get from the public as we're continuing to synthesize what we hear. So I would say, nothing's been approved yet, certainly. We continue to refine as we get input. So something like 7 stories, right, is very specific, but we know that the highest high should be towards South Maple, for instance, and that we need to create that plane from Winter Hill.
I think having been to those sessions, I think what we heard very clearly is we don't want high density development. So people said we don't want 10 stories, which is why I think you're seeing it capped. I think staff had presented low density, moderate density, kind of high density, and showed examples of what those look like. So I think balancing the, hey, we want to do more on affordable housing in Falls Church and meet these policy goals. We don't want 10 stories. It feels like the 5 to 7 reflected both the spirit of those conversations as well as the public comments we've been getting. So thank you.
Maybe one thought that we will take away from this conversation is we don't want to get into a situation where what the council does on first reading is different than the words in the RFP. And so we're going to sync those up so that there's not confusion there. And since that's still kind of moving along, this language will be modified to reflect what's ultimately done on first reading.
Justine has her hand up. Justine?
Yeah, thank you. I just have a couple comments. One is, I know that we're going after LIHTC, or I know that the assumption is that a lot of these developers would go after LIHTC funding. Is there anything that we could put in the document, the RFP, that would suggest that they look for, that we would encourage others sources of funding, whether it's the social housing, something similar to social housing, like what's done in Montgomery County, or other ways of funding this creatively beyond just LIHTC. I know LIHTC is the most common and most popular option, but would it be reasonable and would it make sense to include a suggestion for developers to look at other affordable funding options without it being a requirement?
Yeah, I would support just general broad language that whether it's LIHTC or another financing mechanism, that we would be okay with that.
Yeah, and I'm looking for, we'll take that note and plug it in where it's appropriate.
Justine, do you have others?
Yeah, and so I think also in the spirit of keeping things open, and so not saying that they have to find other sources besides LIHTC, but saying that we would encourage it. Regarding the ESC's comment, I believe that their comment was based around suggestions from an affordable housing developer on better environmental practices for building standards. My general concern that I have is that I think of the term called everything bagel liberalism, which is a term that was applied to the California Rail and all sorts of other things, which is why did California Rail not happen? And it partly didn't happen because there was all sorts of requirements that were suddenly added on to the high-speed rail project, whether it was they had to serve rural areas, and then they had to have union labor, and then they had to have minority-owned businesses doing. And so there's all these really worthwhile goals that then got added on to this rail project and then made it very expensive and infeasible to do. And so in the same way, I do like to think of like our goal here is affordable housing. And so if it is possible to add on the ESC's request, that would be amazing. But I don't want us to lose sight of like what it is we're trying to do here. And if adding on some of these other requirements make it that much more difficult to accomplish our primary goal, I wouldn't want to like burden the project anymore. And so to that extent, I would also like to have, if we do incorporate the ESC's suggestions, that we either do it in a way that says that we would have preference for projects that do this thing, or have it not be something that is absolutely mandatory, or I guess better understand the requirements to make sure that they're not adding significant costs to the building itself. So that's my second note.
Could I just
and
quickly
then my third
chime
note is,
in on that one before you get to your third one, Justine? So generally, I have the same reservation, because if you look at our SC process and our voluntary concessions, we love everything bagels. Everyone's got a little bit of something in the VCs. And so I generally have concerns about trying to throw too much at this project, especially if we have a goal of trying to make some serious progress on our affordable housing goals. That said, before we kind of make the modifications that the ESC is asking for, I had sent to staff a suggestion of Enterprise Green Community Certification was actually used in Alexandria. And so given that there is a nearby community that has an affordable housing project under development, it's probably worth looking to them of what the requirements are. I assume they have similar financial constraints. I would not want this to be like a LEED Platinum project, but knowing that this certification is coming from an affordable housing developer and owner, they probably understand the realities of how to finance this. And so they probably, the ESC recommendation probably comes with some of that in mind. So generally agree with Justine, but I would say maybe let's do some research with Alexandria of whether this is good to add, and then we can consider the ESC's comments.
And I'll just add, having sat in that ESC meeting, the Enterprise Green Community Certification actually gives you more points on LIHTC applications. And the Matt, who was on the ESC, who works in he's a consultant for green buildings, said every single developer who's going to reply to this knows this standard of building, that there's nothing new or tricky. And some of the things that we have listed in there, like Earthcraft and LEED Gold, and there's one more, Energy Star, are all, that's kind of the everything bagel. That's like, try this one, try this one, try this one. But the green community, the Enterprise Green Community Certification plus zero emissions is actually like the baseline standard that affordable housing development should have. So it was super interesting to hear them talk about all those different things, because everyone was talking, well, what does this mean? What does this mean? And he basically said, this is the one that will really make a difference in a LIHTC application, and also just any developer who's building affordable housing knows about this specific one.
And hopefully long-term for residents, lower utility costs and a greener building.
Right.
Cool. Sorry, Justine, I just wanted to interject with that.
Oh,
Do you have more comments?
That's helpful. I just want to say then, thank you, Mary Beth, for chiming in on that, and Letty too. So then to that point, if this isn't something that is unduly burdensome, and is something that we can do more research on and just make sure that it's, not going to scuttle the project because of this, then I would support including it. And then I guess my final thing is, so just so that I'm totally clear, basically in September, the city council would be able to say, to look at all the different proposals and say, hey, no, you know what? We don't like any of these. We're not going to move forward with any of these. And maybe we need to completely redo an RFP and issue a new RFP. That is an option we have in September. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. That makes me feel better about this process, because just knowing that we do have that layer of control. Great. Okay. Thank you. That's all my comments.
Thank you. Anyone who hasn't gone yet? Have I gone around the room for anyone who hasn't gone yet? Okay, do people have second rounds of comments? Laura.
More questions. So throughout this RFP document, there's mention of the city's tenant relocation code. And so I just wanted to understand that a little better. Does that mean that the developer is responsible for funding relocating the tenants? And I tried to find it in the code. I couldn't really find a lot of specificity. And so if you could talk to that a little bit more.
So that's going to be on your work session coming up. It's basically that when current tenants that have a lease are displaced because of either major maintenance or redevelopment, there is an obligation that they are housed during that period of time, and that the developer pays for that. Now, in a financing scheme like this, that's all kind of goes into the pro forma, and it becomes part of kind of how the overall project is financed. And we would, so that's something we'll keep an eye on.
Okay. So that would be something the panel could look at exactly how. I just want to make sure, I know when we've met with the community, we assured people that, they weren't going to be, for lack of a better term, kicked to the curb, that we would watch out for them. So I just wanted to make sure. So that would be something that the panel could see how that was going to be covered. Okay, and then one other thing, this is just a quick question. On page 6, the RFP timeline, there's a line that says panel interviews. Is that just the meeting with the like, is that just what that is meeting with the panel, or?
Yeah, meeting with the EAC is the idea.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That's all I had for, I have a question about the staff report, but that's all I have for RFP right now.
I skipped Mary Beth. You did not get to go.
I have two kind of big questions, but one is a little question. On page 10, we're referring to the Falls Church housing inventory by housing type. And it says that Virginia Village are the only garden apartments in Falls Church. But that's not, I mean, we have other garden apartments. We have the Fields, we have the one right down the street here on Maple Avenue, whose name just escapes me now, Columbia West, Channel Terrace. All of those would be considered garden apartments, but they're, the thing that's unique about Virginia Village is not the garden apartmentness, but that it's individually owned, not part of a larger complex. And I don't know how much that actually matters in the RFP, but it's one of those things that I keep.
So we had struck that in other places in the RFP, and so this was just a footnote that
Okay.
It's good observation.
So then the way this table 1 is like a multifamily apartment is what? Mixed use plus Channel Terrace plus the Fields, or is it just mixed use? I'm just wondering how that, how everything gets sliced and diced there.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the affordable living policy. That's how it was done there. So I think we're borrowing this table from them, but I will check on that.
Okay. And then this is like a bigger question, which is with this RFP, you know, when we did the RFP and the comprehensive agreement for West Falls, we had a 99-year lease. Does this what does this contemplate? A lease, does it contemplate us giving the land to the developer because we own it and they're going to develop it for us? Does it contemplate them buying the land from us? Is that part of the actual RFP?
Yes.
So, you know, ultimately that kind of gets into the overall financial plan, and so they'll tell us what that they need. Our past is that with our prior with Wesley, we contemplated we were just going to turn title over, and so just I think that's in my mind anyway that that's probably going to be necessary, and I'll express one other opinion also that while there are nice things about a ground lease, they are also very complicated, and you just it seems to me this should be a fee simple transfer in my opinion.
So do we want to say that in here?
It says so in there.
It does say
It does
we don't want to. Okay.
It says.
both options.
It's
we envision a fee simple transfer, but we'd be open to other financial.
I think it kept it even because personally I'm like, why give away the land? So I would
So the
prefer to see
complexity,
a lease, you know, $0 lease or something. But I think you have it kind of even.
Yeah, so I would recommend sort of expressing a bias towards fee transfer because I think the respondents would be allergic to a lease. I think they would have a highly negative view towards it.
And also, if I remember correctly from West Falls, we can't hold a lease longer than 40 years, which is why we got the EDA involved with West Falls. And I think the intent is the EDA eventually gets out of this as well.
Yeah, we could get, that would be a good thing for Jones Lang LaSalle. I'm giving my opinion, but others might have better informed.
Yeah, I'd like to hear JLL's opinion on that.
Okay.
And then the other just big question and I think I read it in here, I just want to make sure I read it properly, is the RFP is related to the 10 properties that the city controls, possibly an 11th. The zoning is the whole property so that those individual ones that are still individually owned would follow the zoning that we're creating for the whole property. I just want to make sure I've got that totally correct.
That's correct, yeah. So as proposed, it would be a new overlay district, effectively replacing the MUR that is over it now.
I thought it was 9, probably 10, not 10, probably 11.
City controls 9 properties.
Okay.
Okay, so it's 9, probably 10, but eventually it could become 11. And if in the process then of going through this RFP, the city gets control of an 11th property or a 12th property, do we slide that in? Do we say to the?
No, it would be part of the same overlay, so we wouldn't need to slide it in.
Okay.
It would, under the rules of the overlay, if the city's plans for the property or our selected respondents' plan for the properties meets the tests of the overlay that allows redevelopment with higher density, those tests will be to provide an affordable housing component or to meet an open space need. Those would be two sort of standards that have to be met first, and then you can access higher density.
Do you mean
Per
slide it?
the rules of the zoning, of the overlay district. And
Right.
that's what the planning commission is going to be wrestling with on Wednesday night. We're going to go a deeper dive into that when it comes back to you in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Do you
What I
mean
meant was
slide
slide,
in-
it into the RFP.
Yes.
Like,
Oh.
our RFP is for, right, 9, possibly 10.
That's
but
right.
suppose,
So there is an expression in here, and I think that's something that we need greater clarity on there. I think we should express that, just this concept.
Yes, like if in the next 6 months, someone decides that they actually want to sell in the city, they see that we're pretty serious, this is moving along, they're like, I think I should get in on this now.
Yeah.
How do we incorporate number 11 or number 3?
That's right.
all right, and then I would also, I already mentioned the ESC thing, but their recommendation when we get there, I think should just, I hope that we'll be able to incorporate it.
Anything else? Okay. Art?
All right, so now's my list of content items. Most of them are pretty tame. For instance, you talk about 2-bedroom. I think we probably want to put in there 2-bedroom or larger, because if the developer can come in with some 3 bedrooms, that'd be great. I'm not going to hold them to it, but just minor. You talk about interior setback between properties within Virginia Village, but don't really talk about what happens with lot consolidation. I think we've all kind of assumed you can take 2 adjacent lots and have 1 building across both, but it doesn't really say that, and I don't know if that's in here or in zoning, or just to be clear. I mentioned the right-of-way. There's a comment in here about the non-residential uses, that there's a preference towards daycare and so forth, but the way it's written, it feels like that's a preference over residential use. And I think what we've really been talking about is if we brought in non-residential use on ground floor, we have a preference towards daycare and what's listed there, but it reads it like we would prefer those over ground floor residential, and I'm not sure we want to maximize the residential. Let's see. So you also don't really talk about design character. We're going to get into this with the next subject, but I would prefer to see something, we kind of touch on it with keep with small town, but our recent architectural style of the city has been to go seriously urban style, and people don't like it, and that actually goes against what's in our comp plan. So we really do need to start stating that and say, we're looking for that small town character. And some of that is not extreme. It's like use divided light windows instead of a single pane, or have some sloped roofs in there. And it would be important, I think, to communicate that to the developer ahead of time, because at this stage, they could go either way. They could just we'll just go in this direction and it's no big deal. So those are, and then all the way back on page 8, I think you made a reference as you're describing the property has a rich transit environment. And I feel like that's an overstatement because we've got a property that's 30-minute walk away from the nearest metro station. It's near 2 bus lines, one of which is every 12 minutes, which is good, but the other one is every 30 minutes. I wouldn't describe that as a rich transit environment. We're good. We're just not, it's a bit of an overstatement. I think we can maybe delete the word rich. Now for the, and then last one is in 4.8, you talked about 120 days from initial submission to conceptual plan, to site plan. And I feel like from what you've just said about schedule and so forth, 120 days to site plan, you're talking about from the submission in kind of the end of July, August, September, October, November. Do we really expect site plans by the end of November? And because what we're going to get back in the end of July is more conceptual than, this is not your true proposal where it's like, things are going to be a bit more conceptual than we might otherwise expect. To get from there to site plan, that seems kind of fast, and I think that needs to be re-examined, that timing. And that might have been still based on the previous dates. Now for the tough ones. The plane angle, and we've talked about this. The base plane angle, you're talking about starting it at the higher grade level. So if you're talking about 45 degrees from where the ground hits the property line, but we're in an environment where there's an increase in grade. So basically, that's bumping it up maybe 5 feet. I'd appreciate if you and if you think about, take that to the extreme, where if you have a retaining wall on the inside of a property line and going up 15 feet, if you take the base angle at the top of the retaining wall, you're really giving a lot of extra height versus keeping the base angle, the bulk angle starting at the ground level, the grade for the building itself, and just extend it over to the property line and using that. I think in this case that might be about 5 feet less, but more realistic in what you should be expecting. And the other one is, and this is the tough one, the feedback we got from people, they were asked about heights and 5 to 7. And you've put in 5 to 7. Well, we all know you put in 5 to 7, that means 7. From my conversations with people over what's been built, the community considers 7 high density. It is not medium density, it is high density, according to the community. And when we look at that, even above that, no, 5 to 7 is high density, or 7 stories is high density. And when I look at, when you give somebody a range, what we should be doing is taking the middle. So first off, we shouldn't put ranges in here, they're too vague. And I think that needs to be changed to 6. We take the middle. When we talk about 3 to 4, that's 3.5. Take the middle. I don't think the 3 to 4 really changes things because everything is really driven by the bulk angle. But that maximum height, I really am uncomfortable with 7. I think the community has spoken. They have said they don't want that high a density. But I think 6 is much more reasonable. And I think it gets us, we're still getting to where we want to get to. I think we'll have a much nicer community there. So we have that one. Let me just double check. That was, one last thing. You changed the term to stable rent in the RFP. What does that mean? I hear it and I think rent control. And I don't think that's necessarily what we're thinking, because we do need to be able to adjust for inflation. So what is, I'm not clear what stable rent means.
Yeah, we'll clarify that a little bit. I actually had a little bit of input on that wording, and it's a little too generic. But in our communication with the existing tenants, they've been worried about, now that the city owns the property, the EDA owns the property, what's going to happen to their rent? And we've said, well, we're going to keep them stable. There's going to be inflation increases, but they're not going to go crazy. So that's where that word comes from. But we can be more, I think we could clarify that.
Yeah, I thought that was what we were trying to go towards, but I read it and I was like, I'm not really clear.
The intent is that residents who currently live there, when they return, they would be paying comparable rent. That's the other part of I think that's what that section mentioned, I think.
Well,
for their AMI levels, I think they go through the similar.
For existing tenants, yeah.
Not for, the rents for future tenants would be adjusted based on their income and what the AMI levels for that building are. But for existing tenants, they would be.
I think the wording just needs some more work.
Justine has her hand up. Justine?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Yeah, I was curious, what are how many stories are the other buildings on Maple, so that I can get some context for the 5 to 7 stories? Like how tall is, or what's the height of Pearson and Tax Analysts and 455 Tinner?
I believe they peak at 6 stories. I could be wrong. They kind of fluctuate in height. Or I think the average height might be I think it's 55 feet.
Mm-hmm. So then I guess my other question is, I guess 455 Tinner is, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but maybe even Pearson. So Pearson does taper in some of the directions. Is that correct? Or no, it doesn't taper.
They taper towards Winter Hill, yeah.
They do taper. Do they taper the same amount, which would be I don't know, to 3, or how many stories do they taper to? Do you know?
I don't know specifically.
Okay. I guess I'm just interested in the context around the buildings, and specifically because we are asking for lower density on one side. I guess also, I guess to Art's point about not wanting flat roofs or whatever else, having, I guess, more ability to go up a little higher in some points, to have more variation in the roof line and other things like that, might be helpful for architectural details, while also trying to maintain as much affordable housing as possible. And so while I hear Art's point about the 6 stories on Maple, I guess I'm wondering if there's flexibility that we can have, or if there is still ways to provide flexibility, saying maybe our preference would be for something that is similar to what else is on the street already, which maybe on average is 6 stories, but we would encourage to have variations in the roof line and other things like that, such that it could go up to 7 stories in some places. Or I guess what I'm trying to say is I just want to make sure that we're not necessarily saying it has to be exactly this height and then losing some of the flexibility in terms of what the streetscape looks like.
A question on the current underlining zoning for the quads that are closest to bowling alley. Those are B1 and not RM. And the height of
B2, yes.
Of B2 is 85 feet by right?
I think it's 75 feet.
75, right? Which is 6 or 7 stories?
6 or 7. That's
correct.
But look,
Sorry, no middle schoolers here to joke about 6, 7, I guess. But
yeah. But looking at a street view, Justine, it looks like the Taxanos building is kind of 4 to 5. There's a bit of step back there, and then Pearson Square, I guess, is 5 and 6. We won't get into the height of Quinn. That's kind of, I think, people are not happy about that height.
So then, I mean, and I guess like, you know, there's all these trade-offs where it's like maybe we get a little bit more park space, or we get a little bit more community space if we get to 7 stories. So then I guess, I don't know, there seems to be like a lot of different things that we're weighing. And so I guess I would be a little, I don't know if there's a way to get a realistic, you know, we would appreciate 6 stories, but like knowing what the trade-offs are. And so I almost don't want to say like absolutely no 7 stories, but saying like, what are the trade-offs if we don't have 7 stories, or if we go for 6 stories, what would we be losing or gaining? And so keeping our options open in some way.
And so this is hearing the discussion between that and then the earlier discussion about kind of the parallel process between RFP. This feels like a place, and I've mentioned this second, third time now, where I would love to have JLL at the table, because we've hired our real estate consultants to give us advice. And so I think the tricky thing we are navigating with the RFP is how to balance the community guardrails of what we perceive the community wants. And I don't think it's universal that people don't like 7 stories. I think it depends on the context, because I think a trade-off is that you might have more green space and open space, as Justine said, if you go 1 story up, right? And that might be a trade-off we'd be willing to make. So how do we balance those guardrails, whether it's in the form of ranges of heights and density setbacks, while being flexible and open enough in RFP to not stifle any creative options we get? Because I would hate for us to say, we only get 6, and people are like, well, that's not financeable. That does not hit the sweet spot of what we need for LIHTC financing, and then not turn anything in, or turn in something that, you know, we don't like either. So I think that's the tricky thing that we're navigating right now. And given that we have real estate experts who we've hired to help us with this, I would love for them to be at the table to give us advice on that question, as well as this parallel process that some of us have angst over, and how they feel the market might respond by having the zoning and the comp plan and small area plan in parallel, whether they think the market would respond favorably. I presume we've already run through this with JLL. They have not said, red light, stop, don't do this. The market's not going to like the fact that you don't have zoning decided before you do the RFP. Otherwise, staff would have told us that. So I assume that JLL is telling us this feels okay given this information you're putting in the RFP. But rather than us continue to like deliberate among us, which is healthy, I do think having the experts at the table, probably at our next work session, would be helpful to give us some sense of assurance. So.
Yeah, I guess my concern with putting 7 stories in there is that kind of takes away that flexibility of, we're basically saying, go ahead with 7 stories and you don't have to trade anything off for it. I would agree with asking them to say, hey, are there elements of our limits that you could trade off, or as part of their response? So put in 6 stories and then say, hey, what are some of the trade-offs? So they may come back, so that they have the option to come back and say, hey, if you let the building, half of it be 7 stories or 6.5 or whatever it is, you could have this much more green space. Have something in there to give them the ability to provide that information. I think if we put 7 stories in, there goes 7 stories, we lose all negotiating power. There are no trade-offs.
So maybe the language is that, like, when you respond, let us know that you might go up or lower in density and height depending on a trade-off with other things that we've put in the RFP.
Yeah.
Whether it's parking, open space, whatever.
And we can reject those, and we could decide to take them at that point. We then have control. But I think putting it in right now, we lose that option, that flexibility.
Did you have other things, Art?
That wasn't enough?
Oh,
yeah,
sorry. I know it was officially Justine's turn, and then I just wanted to go back to Justine before.
Yeah, no, I guess I would very much like to talk to the consultant that we have and have them for whatever the next meeting on this is. But then, yeah, I think something, maybe this is language that we do put in the RFP. It's somewhere is like, I guess, understanding what the trade-offs are. So, and that comes to like even things that we put in there that we're expecting knowing that there's still flexibility one way or the other if they let us know what those what we could gain or what we could lose by doing a certain thing. And so as you mentioned, Letty, even parking and understanding how that factors in would be useful to know. And so that we have a deeper idea as to like what their decision points are.
So on parking, if I could jump in, because that was one of my comments. So we can debate whether we are transit rich or just decent transit, whatever language you want to use. But I know right now we noted that we'd be flexible because we are transit rich. I would encourage whoever responds to actually consider shared parking arrangements. Because anecdotally, and I think from some of the data collection, the 3 adjacent garages, 301 West Broad, Tenner Hill, and Pearson, are overparked. And that would be a really good way to bring down their costs if they actually consider some shared parking arrangements, all within developments within a block, to actually help share that resident parking and not have to dig 2 stories or whatever they have to do here. And so I would highly encourage we suggest shared parking arrangements instead of having to park all of it on the site. I know that we've also heard concerns from the non-city properties for street parking. And so if there's, again, flexibility that the shared parking arrangements could extend to not just our parcels, but the ones in the neighborhood, I think the residents would appreciate that too. Was there anything else, Justine? You still have your hand up?
That was it. So
Okay.
I'll take it down, sorry.
Erin?
So I'll try to go quickly. I'll start with high-level questions that I don't need like long answers. Getting to Letty's question about JLL and sort of hearing from them, is there a point at which council is going to, or you anticipate sharing whatever pro formas that JLL is preparing? And is that going to be like in closed session at some point? Like where does that fit on the calendar?
Let me get back with council on that, but we will get them scheduled with council, and that is something they are working on.
Okay. And then similarly, the RFP talks about not only the construction cost, but like a 15-year sort of operating cost. When JLL is doing the pro formas, are they going to capture budget implications? And it's not because I'm looking for like a net positive revenue, affordable housing development. I just think for like fiscal planning, right? That we can't sort of have our head in the sand as to budget-wise, how we need to be thinking about how we're financing or subsidizing sort of like implications for overall planning in terms of the city. So
I would say we'll do our own fiscal impact analysis using our model so that we can compare apples to apples.
Got
And
it.
JLL would not do that.
Okay. The RFP talks about the tenant relocation policy. Who is administering the ADU program once there's like, so the Affordable Housing Covenant would like run with the land if there were a fee simple transfer. The RFP is sort of silent as to the ADU program. Right now, our HHS office, right, like administers the ADU program as to the mixed-use buildings. So who ultimately is administering like the program, and the RFP seemingly should incorporate that and also actually have like that component contractually in the agreement.
So it's a good point. We would want the proposer to handle the ADUs. Most of our mixed-use projects, we have an MOU with them, and they handle the ADU process per our rules.
Okay, so so consider whether that needs to be kind of clearer at the point that we're talking about the tenant relocation policy. I'm going to go through, not like page by page, because I have comments on each page, but I'm not going to share comments on each page. I'll like provide some written things for where I think the language can be cleaned up. I understand what you're talking about when you're saying preferred scenario and wanting the developers to kind of say like, we chose this and we think it's preferred or optimal relative to these other things. I think that the use of preferred scenario in like the actual RFP should be something we consider not using. So like, I think it's clear if you talk about something in terms of like the development submission or the developer proposal, instead of seemingly talking about a preferred scenario when we're the people who ultimately have a preference as to what gets built, and sort of it toggles between like the city's preferences and the preferred scenario among the 3 like options that we're putting out. And so I think you should just use some other nomenclature than preferred scenario, even though as part of the RFP packet, you are asking them to explain their rationale for choosing scenario A, B, and C relative to the other scenarios and why that's optimal in their view. For the submission instructions for communications, we say no contact with city council, city manager, or staff. And I had a question about whether the EDA and the evaluation committee should also be included among those entities that don't have contact with anyone in the RFP process. For section 2, site background and context, I have some suggestions, just like making this more Virginia Village specific, getting rid of like a lot of the City of Falls Church repetition, that I will include in sort of more detailed comments I'll send in. I had the same reaction to Art on parking and the transit-rich environment. I think in the community conversations, which I was at, that, you know, we heard those concerns about parking. I would support Letty's idea of including in here, having respondents explore shared parking agreements, but when we went through the Quinn process and during these community meetings, the parking issues came up, and I don't think that we can say we're transit rich when we know, and studies show that, you know, oftentimes when you have lower income populations, that they need more reliable cars because they have less flexibility in terms of work hours and, you know, are not the people who are necessarily, you know, to have virtual, remote work options, and can't, wait around for a bus for 45 minutes that isn't coming reliably on schedule. The housing market snapshot, I think, could be clearer as to the units. As Mary Beth said, maybe the way to break them down is to say mixed income residential or multifamily residential or residential multifamily, whatever it is that is the mixed income apartments versus the residential multifamily that are those sorts of apartments that we're talking as not having commercial spaces, but it doesn't make sense as the tables are currently sort of constructed. And I don't know what it is that we're trying to capture.
It can be newer mixed use, it could be.
Just use the nomenclature we have on the Where Students Live chart.
Yeah.
We categorize them well, but
Yeah.
I don't know whether the data matches this, but we name them different things.
Right.
Like new mixed use.
Yeah.
Older residential.
Mid-rise.
Yeah.
Garden, yeah.
But so just to second cleaning that up and making it meaningful and why we have it done a certain way. For the affordable housing analysis, we talk about the 6% of the city's housing stock, but we never include what the projection is for 2040 and what 6% is. And so we talk about the gap of 400 units, but we never actually have a baseline to say this is the projection of what we need. And so I think it would be helpful for it to be in there. And then I think that to make this clearer, it was taken out of the Housing Commission report or the affordable living policy, but you could probably just collapse tables 2 and 3 and not do this 2024 versus 2025, 2026 sort of
I agree.
breakdown of
Yeah.
things, and then
Not
just
make them do the math on that.
and then just add a column for what's in table 3 to what the expiry date is, if any, in the current table that's 2. And then you could include, when we're talking about other things, whether it's through special exception processes or, avoiding expiration of existing units, I guess we now also have, the potential under the Faith and Housing Bill for additional affordable units in the city to help meet that gap. For site control and conveyance, I'll just skip that one for now because I think it got somewhat cleaned up. On the preferred scenario in section 3, I think this is again a place where someone needs to go through more carefully and kind of how we're talking about the language, because something's carried over from the earlier draft. So in scenario A, paragraph 2, for example, we're talking about once renovated, the city-owned units in the quadplexes, when I think we should just be talking about the refurbished units or the expanded units, they're potentially no longer the city-owned units, right? Like they're now these people's units, and we're talking about like the future unit. And so we should just think about ways of talking about things in the future sense of what you're planning for and not relative to the ownership structure as it currently exists, because it starts getting confusing as to like city-owned, the city-owned versus the privately owned, the things that are in the RFP versus the things that are subject to the overlay district. So I think you should just clean it up and use different and better language there. In scenario B, the same way, we say that that B needs to incorporate elements of C, but then we like include the elements in C and B regardless. And so either we should cross-reference things in C and not include them in B, or we should include them in B and then include them again in C, but we shouldn't cross-reference C and then also include them in B. Just for like clarity as to what's carrying over and what isn't carrying over. I had the same question as Art in scenario B, paragraph 1, on the infill development scenarios. It says, you know, it needs to incorporate scenario C, paragraphs 1A, B, and C. And then scenario C is the multifamily ground floor building uses, and the RFP reads as though those are required for scenario C. And then the evaluation criteria, they potentially fall out. I think we need to be like much clearer as to, are they a mandatory requirement? Are they not a mandatory requirement? And I thought that the difference between scenario B and scenario C might be that for low density infill development, we considered those like residential only structures, and it wouldn't make sense to actually have the multifamily ground use requirement in the lower infill development scenario. And then you would be including it in potentially the higher floor development scenario. So we just like need to clean that up and figure out where it is, because it might be that it shouldn't be in either place as a mandatory requirement. And if it is a mandatory requirement, it should be in one place and not the other. I'm going to stay away, I guess, from the zoning issues. I still think that we're going to need to like work those out, and I get, you know, putting something in here, but I think the danger of putting the placeholders is that the information has gotten ahead of the conversations. And the other concern I have, without going totally into the zoning, that I'll just flag at this point, is that I read this paragraph or this section of scenario C1A together with what I gleaned from the Planning Commission packet on Wednesday, to basically allow like a 7-story stick building in one of the privately owned quadplexes if someone on South Maple decided to develop their single quadplex that way. And I don't know if that's like an unintended consequence of the zoning rule, but I don't know that that's necessarily what we were trying to facilitate. And so we need to think about things like that in terms of not only our parcels, but what the overlay district is, because I read this as if someone comes in and says they'll do 12%, you know, affordable housing on their lot, that like that we're going to have a 7-story singular building at like whatever address X South Maple. And it's not clear, like this seems to downplay the relationship to the other existing quadplexes in a way that I think is gonna like potentially detract from the overall cohesive like nature of trying to retain any community feel to what's currently there. Because it seems to be that all the, you know, the edges and the transitions are relative to Winter Hill and Big Chimneys for good reason, but then it seems like we're like, and don't worry about transitions to the interior lots so that you have an X-story building next to the current quadplexes. For hybrid scenarios, we haven't made clear in the RFP at all whether the submissions have to encompass all of the city-owned properties. So can someone come in and say, we want a fee simple transfer of the bowling alley lots, but we want to just leave to the city and do nothing with the tax analyst's lots? And so I think we need to be clear as to when we say a hybrid scenario, is it because our expectation is that someone is making or that the RFP is dependent on someone actually doing something with all the city-owned lots? Or would we consider making a land contribution as to some, but retaining holdings as to others? The policy goals and preferences sometimes repeat the things that are in the mandatory requirements. So again, just to review that more carefully. And then I think that what Justine was getting at in the LIHTC funding is in section 4.4 with the development team past performance. So we say that in a development application that someone has to provide 3 examples of successful LIHTC funded projects. And I would think that we would want to include something that says, if 3 such LIHTC projects are not available, that team should include similar projects financed through other means to ensure affordable housing so that it's not dependent on someone having 3 LIHTC projects to be considered for the RFP. In the proposed business terms under 4.5, I don't think it's clear as to what we're always talking about. So the proposed business terms could either go to the city's land sale and leases, or it could go to, sometimes it reads as though it's the developer's land sale or leases in terms of any affordable homeownership opportunities. And so I would just say that should be clearer. Again, the parking issue, likely we might want to say more than we do here, given that we say that we don't take up parking, and we seemingly won't take up parking in the zoning changes, but then we leave parking completely open to any waivers or modifications. So I think we need to probably hit something in the middle. And then for the evaluation process and criteria, I raised the earlier issues about just wanting more clarity around the role of the EAC relative to council. And then as far as the evaluation criteria itself, I didn't see any criteria that actually captures in a point score the compatibility with the neighborhood more generally. So everything's sort of site specific, but then doesn't include things relative to Big Chimneys and Winter Hill in terms of the points themselves. And then for the zoning, as we move to zoning, I would ask, I know that we referenced June 9th and June 11th dates, probably would want to have a kind of town hall or community meeting or library sort of based meeting for the community at large, and not just sort of the Virginia Village and Winter Hill things that are currently in the Planning Commission report. And then at those meetings, think that it would be very helpful to have actual renderings on what the max zoning is, so that people can understand it and provide meaningful public input on it. And that's all I have.
Okay. Others?
Just one quick comment about the housing and just the categories. And this doesn't need to be in the RFP, but it's information I would love to get, which is how much housing do we have within a quarter mile of the city? I mean, we focus within our borders and everything is within our borders, but I think it's good for us as the council to understand, what's within a quarter mile and what's coming, because we have we have the housing in West Falls, we have up in Seven Corners, there's 2 developments happening. It'd just be good for us to understand that and know.
I think with quarter mile, I think it's just the Quinn Homestretch project.
No, not within of Virginia Village. I'm talking about within the border of the city.
The city.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Okay.
Yeah, we're not going to be able to get that too. I'm not sure. I'll have to think about how we get that, but.
Sorry, I forgot one minor
That's
thing
fine.
that I also think should be reflected between versions 3 and 4.
It
In
might
the housing breakdown, we talk about a mixed income community. So paragraph B4, for example, we talk about helping to deliver a mixed income community, and then balancing ownership needs. And I know we've talked about this in terms of like a mixed income community of like affordable plus market rate. Mixed income here is like not clear because it says more specifically, and then the mixed income is only mixed income in a range of affordable percentages. And then we talk about ownership needs, but the A, B, and C only talk about renters. And so I know we're trying to like retain flexibility, but we have like not given really any clear direction as to what the ownership options are. And to the extent there are ownership options, are we also talking about affordable home ownership options? Or are we talking only about like market rate of ownership options to offset what are the renter AMI percentages here? So like we're talking in two different ownership structures, but then the A, B, and C only are talking about renters and not owners.
Anything else? I had a quick comment / question about on the staff report. And first I wanted to thank staff for including the procurement timeline. I thought that was really helpful. So one thing I wanted to make clear, Mr. Trainer. So I think it was July 13th, there's the schedule to hold the pre-proposal conference, and then we give the developers a tour. Is that right?
Is that in?
It's not there, but
That's
then I
relative
think
to
I read in the RFP. So it seemed to me that July 13th, there was going to be a pre-proposal conference that people could zoom in on, but also that same day that there was going to be a tour. So if that was something that, I think some people in city council might like to attend to see that. And then also that night, if we could get so that would be, I believe, the July 13th meeting. If we could get some sort of report, Wyatt, about just sort of some comments that came in from that, questions, and just sort of a brief update on how that proposal conference went, just to kind of give us an idea. I think that would be really helpful. And looking again at this same timeline, so where it says, let's see, in terms of addendums, so when we talk about addendums, mid-July, potential release of any RFP addendum, that's the zoning piece, is that right? So it says mid-July, potential release of any RFP addendums.
Yeah.
Is that just like if we're, that's where this parallel process comes into play, and if a zoning?
Yeah, probably the small area plans, and zoning. I know first reading, I think is mid to late July. So yeah, they would be kind of both of those pieces.
Okay. And then, I know this whole timeline is tight, and, so we release the RFP, and then again, you're looking at this mid-July pre-conference meeting with interested parties, and then the RFP is due, I think, like 2 weeks later. So is this something that I'm wondering if, will we hear that feedback from developers like, hey, this is just too, we just can't get it done, and we came to this conference with questions, and now the deadline's in 2 weeks, we can't get it done. Like, so this is something that could come to us, and then we could tweak the timeline if we needed to? I mean, I just hate, I understand why the timeline and the tax credit and all that piece, but I would also, if it's turning off some potential great ideas from developers and things because they just can't get it in, is that something that we can flex that timeline somewhat? Or extend extend the deadline, I guess, would be.
Yeah, I mean, one addendum that we're allowed to issue is an extension to the deadline.
Okay, because that would be something, if someone said, hey, if we had 2 more weeks, we definitely put in a proposal, so I don't want us to limit our options.
If we get a lot of feedback on that on the July 13th, then that would be something we would consider.
Okay, great. And then we could get some sort of update at the council meeting that night, how that call went or that meeting. Okay, great, thank you.
Just as far as the pre-proposal conference goes, and Ms. Flynn mentioned the council members and others can't have contact once the RFP is issued? Is that the starting, like, can we have contact now with the developer? Or are we in the process?
Well, the RFP stands for, and this is fairly standard language.
Okay.
There's a no contact period once it's issued. So
Once
that's
it's
the
issued.
window.
That's the fairly, okay. So like the pre-proposal conference, we couldn't attend because we couldn't be in
Well,
contact.
it does say, outside of the pre-proposal conference.
Oh, okay,
Or
okay.
outside of a public meeting. So a potential respondent could come to a meeting and ask a question in a public meeting. It's meant to be no non-public
No
meeting.
private
That's
back
right.
and forth. Got it.
I usually don't see that happen, but in theory it could happen.
Welcome, Dave. We are wrapping up the conversation.
Sure, thank you. Just a couple quick things. I remain optimistic we can get to a win-win here, and I hope we do. Just a couple things for the RFP. The first thing is that I'm personally interested in making sure that both lower density or lower profile as well as higher profile alternatives be considered. That if it's a higher profile, that we be very careful to maintain good setbacks, step backs, and that most of the, suggested most of the building, if we're going, say, 4 stories, for example, that it be next to the Bowl America. And finally, that there be requirement for shadow, or what are they called, shadow tests, as well, to make sure that we're not degrading the both the park and the surrounding neighborhood. But I think we can get there, and I hope we do. And this is a critical part of it. In a way, I think the RFP is the most important part. The zoning sets the framework, but the RFP actually is the kind of detailed study and hopefully a proposal that can be the win-win that I hope for. So those are my comments. Thank you. Oh, and by the way, specific amendatory language, I can get some of that to you, if that's helpful.
Yeah, if anything that you share with me, then we'd share with the whole council. And we do plan to come back with the council at your next work session on this. So we'll be talking about this document again. We've gotten lots of feedback on it, so it will change next time you see it.
Thanks. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so we've had a lengthy discussion. I think a lot of my comments and questions we kind of sprinkled them throughout. I think so we talked about JLL parking. I think the remaining one is if we can find time for a walking tour in advance of actually the guided site tour when we actually have an RFP issued, I think would be helpful. So Debbie's not here to make fun of me, but I did run through Winter Hill as well as the back of Virginia Village. And now that the trees have leafed out, the trees actually do a really good job screening everything, and they're actually quite tall. I think they're probably at least 45, 50 feet tall. And then if you actually look at the back of Pearson and how it abuts Winter Hill, I guess councils before me did a really good job thinking about kind of the step backs and setbacks and tapering to that community. And so I would encourage, whether we do it formally or informally, actually look at kind of what was done on South Maple and understand the grade changes on South Maple and the differences of what it makes to Winter Hill and how the trees over time have grown and how I think it's been very compatible against Winter Hill. So I would encourage either a walking tour or maybe a council can go out informally as well. Field trip. We could do a field trip.
Yeah, we're looking for dates to do that.
Great. Okay. I think that is it. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
We'll see you again soon.
Are you doing the urban master plan?
I was about to say, we're at 9:30. Are we okay with continuing on? Looks like
really
Cameron's here for the next one. Do people need a break?
You can go get started.
Like 5-minute break? 5-minute break. Okay, 9:45. What did you say? All right. It's still really cold, or maybe it's just me.
I cranked it up to 74 before,
But if it's just me, then I just continue draping myself in blankets. Welcome back, Dave.
How you doing?
Okay. It's 9:44. We ready to get back? Alrighty, is cameras back on? I don't want to jinx it in case we have audio issues. Okay, they're on. Okay, welcome, Cameron.
Hello all, how are you?
Thank you for joining us. I think we're ready to jump into new urban design guidelines. No, Art is very ready.
So this is just an initiating resolution, and I'll turn it over to Cameron to sort of lay out the concept of the scope of work. We'd like council's feedback on that. And with any further council direction, then we would request for this be on the agenda for your next meeting on June 8th. Mr. Garris, thank you very much.
All right, if we jump into this. So this is, in short, an effort to create a new urban design master plan by consolidating the two existing plans and guiding documents that are housed under Chapter 3 of the comp plan and using the opportunity to introduce a few new relevant topics. And so if I jumping into how is this aligned with City Council's goals in regards to good governance. This is staff being proactive and updating comp plan guidance and eliminating confusion with two competing documents. Indirectly, but in a meaningful way, the plan impacts housing and economic development. There's a strong correlation between good design and first floor retail and streetscape, and where people choose to shop, eat, spend money, and ultimately live. The plan advocates for the most fundamental form of transportation, walking and improving pedestrian spaces in the city. And also, importantly, the plan spotlights the subject of sustainability, an aspect missing from both previous documents. So on the left, or let's start with the right. On the right is probably what you're most familiar with if you've dug into the city's plan library. This is the 2017 standards. There was a 2025 amendment. And ultimately, pros, this is a very concise document. It's very nuts and bolts, focuses on utilities, measurements, materials. It's made for developers and staff, reviewing staff to kind of look at and get quick details. Cons, it's lacking a lot of the overarching information and guidance that the larger document to the left has. And in some places, it reads a little more like a public works construction manual. And the document on to the left, which is much larger, from 31 to 113 pages, is a 2001 guiding document called the Design Guidelines. And this was created and tied directly to the comp plan, Chapter 3 of Community Character Design. It goes very much into depth into architectural and urban design guidance, best practice, scaling, detailing, streetscape. It covers everything. The cons is way too lengthy for anyone to really absorb and read, and also is often too prescriptive as well. So ultimately, what we're trying to solve for is clarity. Because this is a primary reference document to the comp plan, we like to produce one reduced plan that carries over relevant guidance and cuts away outdated material or information that's best suited for other plans or documents, and while introducing a few new topics. To give the best visual representation of what I'm talking about when I'm saying streetscape, this is a borrowed image of showing primarily looking at first floor retail store frontage, going from building face to curb. The only way I'd amend this image is to show it going at least into the parking lane, because you have things like streeteries, you have bump out for the curbs and things like that. But that's generally the space we're talking about when discussing streetscape and urban design in this document. So I'm happy to go back to this later on for questions, but on the right column is a generalized format of showing old concepts from the two combined documents. And these are things that really in the last, since 2001 or 2017, guidance really has not changed. The plan is to carry over a lot of these concepts, maybe make the language more concise, but carry over them into the new document. The middle column is reserved for items that we think maybe should be revised or revisited. And then finally, on the far left, we have new concepts which we would like to add and will be the center of the drafting of the plan and also any public engagement we have in future dates. So before this, we had an initial outreach and scope going to all these various boards and commissions to kind of get a first impression and read to receive some general comments. Overall, Kurt and I received that the general guidance is a worthwhile effort. Guidance to make it short, simpler is better. Incorporate advice from small area plans and echo some of that into the current document. And importance of tree canopy, first floor retail, streetscape, public spaces, things like that. And of course, every board commission had a few specific items they had pointed out and highlighted. And we hope to continue the discussion as we reach into the public engagement portion of this process. And as I said before, or as Wyatt said, looking for issuing resolution next Monday, and then we can kind of begin work into public charrettes in the summertime, a few more public engagement activities in the fall, and then starting to write the draft. But I'm happy to open up and answer any questions.
Great, thank you. I know this was a heavily anticipated update, and so thank you for coming. I'm going to go with Justine first because I think she's planning on, she's got other commitments at 10 or 10:30, so. Justine?
That is correct. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll lower my hand. So just a few things. So looking at the new concepts, the old concepts, and the old concepts carried over with no change. I was interested in terms of the scope of this. There are some things that might be nice to update that wouldn't be like a huge discussion. And that would regarding so old concepts carried over, like regarding parking. I think there's general consensus in terms of urban design, that parking should generally be put in the back, not the front next to the sidewalk with lots of curb cuts. And so things like that, I'm wondering, is there room in this, as long as we're going through and updating things, are there simple things that we could just go ahead and update and say for design guidelines, we generally do not want parking next to the sidewalk. It should generally be in the back of the building and not right on the streetscape. Are those things that we could easily incorporate if there is general consensus that that's a good practice to have?
Certainly, yes. This is not an all-comprehensive list of potential updates. Things can carry over, especially as they come out through public engagement process or talking to boards and commissions or with you here today. It's kind of odd, but going back to 2001 document, it does go into depth. So in that document, it does talk about having parking in the rear and things like that. Mm-hmm. So some of that guidance still exists, and it really is kind of carried over and just highlighting it instead of being buried in a 113-page document. But
okay, so that's helpful. But so there still is room to make updates.
Correct.
As we go through this process. And so even though it says old concepts carried over, if through the discussion that we have going forward, we do want to make a simple update or clarification or something like that for something that is being carried over that currently says no change, we could still make that change.
Correct. I think for minor adjustments and things like that, and tweaking guidance or strategies, those are minor enough that we could, make adjustments as we go.
Okay. And then I was just wondering, in terms of I'm flagging block size and layout and site layout, I guess that would include things like pedestrian pathways and other things like that through a site, or making sure that places are accessible. How to describe it, to make sure that there are pathways through
Porosity through a building.
sites.
Through a site.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Correct. Those were added as new concepts. Although site layout kind of is an older concept, but for example, in 2001 document, you'll find they talk about site layout, and the average typical development they're showing is maybe an eighth or maybe a fourth of a block size. While in the last 10 years, we've had West Falls Church development, Broad and Washington, larger projects which take up entire block sizes. There's not, even though we have good developers and architects who are creating good projects, we don't really have anything in the books in terms of what we like to see for a larger project like that. How is that split up? In terms of block sizes, if you're building kind of out things like that, or for example, like you're saying, pedestrian streets or alleys, or shared streets or alleys, connections through these larger projects. So those are all guidance that are missing from any previous documents, and we thought would be good to include.
Okay, that makes sense. And then I guess my final question would be about the architectural preferences and storefront design. Like, is there, this came up with it was CICT, specifically that walkable places and spaces encourage people to go outside and walk around, whatever else. And so a lot of that comes down to how we design things and whether there's enough transparency or other things like that. And so is there room to include some architectural preferences that are updating the architectural preferences that were already included in the 2001 design document?
Yes, for things, like storefronts specifically on the first floor where you're having the most, eyes on the street. I think there's definitely language in the 2001 document that can be carried over that's, gives vague but important advice to developers of saying, transparency is important on the first floor. These type of, general forms or heights are, pattern recognition for people walking by, and, they improve the building's facade in XYZ ways. Being able to talk about architecture without getting too prescriptive is kind of a fine line. I know AAB had a lot of comments on that. And that's something we would definitely work out through the public engagement process. But specifically for storefrontages, yes, I think that's will be included.
Okay, so yeah, thank you. So it generally sounds like there's flexibility here. So even though we've sort of outlined a direction, there's still flexibility in terms of what the community engagement process is like and what the board engagement process is like to shape what this looks like going forward, but hopefully not expanding the scope so much that this becomes bloated and we can't actually get anything through.
There's between the two documents, there's a surprising a lot covered. So if anything, our job is what to reduce and what to make more concise while keeping what's important.
Right.
So.
Okay. Perfect. Well, that covers all my questions. So this, from my perspective, this is really exciting. This is exactly the sort of thing that I was hoping that we'd undertake at some point. And so I'm really glad to see this moving forward. And I think there's a lot of useful things that can come out of this for future development projects. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Who else? Art does.
I've got lots of stuff for this because I am excited for this. As soon as this came up, because I came on council, I'm like, how can I get some of this character and stuff updated? And I'm like, well, here. And then all of a sudden you guys came up with this, and it's like, wait a minute, I was picturing these little things and you came up with this bigger idea, and this is so much better than anything I was thinking about. So I am totally on board with doing this. I do have some comments on you've probably heard a lot of them. The biggest one is that the comp plan vision was updated in 2017. talked about small town character, and the architectural design guidelines are 16 years older than that. And I've reviewed that, and the AAB has reviewed it, and it is, I have issues with not bringing them into giving them some revisions, especially around the architectural preferences and that one more than anything else, and shrink it way down. We don't need to be telling people how to do a canopy over gas station pumps. It's in there. We don't need that anymore. I would suggest, and I think you're heading in that direction, which is really leverage the boards and commissions to the point of maybe even having them do a draft for you. I mean, I look at architectural preferences, and when this comes out, it's going to be something for developers. Developers are going to take that section, for example, and hand it over to their architect, and the architect is the only one who's actually going to use it. So we have architects on the AAB. So I like the idea of having architects write to architects. And the rest of us may be like, what does this mean? But as long as those two understand, it's great. But I think the fact that that document is so old, it's over 25 years old, that the pieces in it, I don't think we can just cut, paste them in. Other ones like crosswalks, sidewalks, those are much more recently done. They're very up to date. Yeah, we just drop them in. That's the biggest thing, is really grab the boards and commissions. Let's really use them. I don't think we use them enough. And I think they would love the opportunity. In fact, I know the AAB would be. It would be excited to help out. The second thing another thing I had was the first two items, and maybe this has changed what you're envisioning, the developer info page, the DRC reviewer page. I think in the earlier versions you were talking about checklists in there for those. While those sections, this should reference checklists, I want to make sure we're careful that we're not putting things into a master plan that we want to be able to revise frequently. Like planning hands a checklist to the developers, you're going to want to be able to, oh wait, we got it wrong, let's update it. There's no policy pieces in that checklist really, so let's figure out a way to do it so that can be updated administratively without having to come to council. I think it's just, because bringing it to council would be just overwhelmingly onerous, and we don't want to add that. But look at the pieces that are in there. I also noticed that it seems like street types, which was in here before, I guess it's now pedestrian streets and alleys.
I was maybe thinking that that terminology was going over people's heads, or I was trying to make it a little more normal language for people to understand. But same idea, yeah, same thing.
Well, I guess in my mind, the idea was we have different types of streets. We have this, we have this state routes, we have major connectors and so forth. And there are some rules that we have that I feel like could be incorporated into here, such as, what are our standards for closing a road? A local residential street, you got to notify the city, you fill out a form, the DPW drops off some barriers, you're done. Versus a state highway, maybe we want to say, okay, you can only close a state highway if council signs off. Is this a place to be capturing those things? Something to think about.
I agree it's a need, but I feel like street closure policy we talked about is like a separate policy decision. I don't know whether you put it in design guidelines. Like that's not right.
It may not be the right place, but
it's people who are probably closing the streets are not the ones that are the developers, probably the users of the street eventually.
Well, and that's the question is, who are we necessarily looking at? Parking is kind of in that boat as well, where it's like, how much do we want in there? I know it's a priority. I've been asking about when we're going to get to it. Feeding into this makes a lot of sense, but is it the right place? Get into how far away from a home or a business should parking exist? You know, you don't want to say, oh yeah, you get credit for parking that's half a mile away, but 2 blocks maybe. And the other question I had is on the staff report, you have this board and commissions and public charrettes. And by the way, I had to Google the word charrettes. I had not heard it before. Can you explain what you're thinking here? Are these aligned with the boards and commissions, or are you going to be aligning it with the sections in the?
Sure.
Can you explain that part?
Yeah, charrette is definitely an old planning term of basically gather people and gather ideas. And I talked with city clerk's office about what's the best way to do this. How would you advertise such a thing if you had all these different people from different boards and commissions? And we realized it was best just to publicize it as a public meeting. So it would be invited, anyone who had to come from these various different boards and commissions, who were people who we talked to previously during the scoping phase. And, the structure of the charrette is to be determined, but it would be kind of a similar presentation and then breaking out into groups, ideally mixing groups, and then in with members of the public, but also, carefully thought of developers, people in construction, people in DPW and staff, and people who have really grounded experience in development. So, we get the good ideas from boards and commissions, but also we're getting the real knowledge base of people who go through this process regularly, and they can say, this is what I deal with, and this is what, I like to see, or this is what halts me in my progress, or makes, this is a barrier to this type of thing. So it would be kind of a very multidisciplinary group of people, but also a heavy focus on those boards and commissions meeting once at least, potentially twice. With a group this big, maybe it's better to have 2 different meetings. And then that would be like our big main takeaway of gathering information before the plan writing phase in the fall.
Yeah, I think it's so big. I worry that it would just be too big, even with 2 of them. I think maybe you might want to take a look at those sections and maybe break it out to say, we're going to be covering these 4 sections during this one, or these 4 sections during that one. And I mean, I'm going to use CACT as an example. There's some of these sections, they are going to give you a ton of feedback. And then there's others, like tree canopy, I don't really expect you to get much feedback from CACT. It's really, I think there's some groupings here that I think would be helpful, and kind of just to shrink them down a little bit, because if it's too big, it's just, you're not going to get what you want.
Yeah, and that's also part of the reason why the scope is the way it is. Ideally, this session is looking at the new concept section, and then the updated, revised section of that chart. And obviously open to if people want to carry over and revise other things, or if there's new concepts that people bring up during that meeting. But yeah, this is a large scope, and more means may be required.
Yeah,
correct.
And before, I would definitely recommend take a hard look at those old concepts and say, there's some that, especially the ones that have not been updated in 25 years, probably should move into the blue column, to the second column. Those are my big ones, because it is just the initiate.
Okay, other comments? Erin?
I can go quickly. I'm fine with the initiating resolution, generally fine with the scope of the work. In terms of boards and commissions, something that struck me just in reading the staff report and then the initiating resolution itself is that I had never realized that the design guidelines were actually anchored in the Historic and Cultural Conservation District in terms of like the authority for them. And it makes sense, right, in terms of like ensuring an aesthetic across the city and sort of, you know, some cohesive development. And the state code provision, you know, talks about sort of, tourism and kind of amplifying these like historic areas. But then it seemed to me that maybe, you know, as the HARB liaison, we should probably put this on a HARB agenda as well for a group to look at, not because it matters for the application of the ordinance to those site-specific applications that come in, but I do think that it may matter just in terms of broader ideas about this. You know, the district is the entire city, but the protected structures are now something like 100 structures. And so they're really only a percentage or a little over a percentage of the parcels in the city. And in an appointments committee, for example, we're frequently talking about, you know, how do we create connections between different experiences in the city, whether it's someone interviewing for EDA or interviewing for Arts and Humanities Council. And so I guess in thinking about urban design guidelines, I would like to maybe think about like what is a nod to the historical like structures and places that anchor this urban guidelines and like make the whole thing important, and how do we kind of like capture that in some places in the guidelines themselves in terms of saying like these are things that are supposed to be promoting tourism in the city, or creating links between different areas of the city so that if you're in, you know, Founders Row, right, or something that gets developed around Founders Row, you know to go look at the thing that's over at the Falls Church, or like go over into the Broadmont area, right? So even though the design guidelines don't apply in the like neighborhoods, so to speak, in terms of like, you know, like the more residential neighborhoods, how do we do things through the guidelines that create links to those areas that make it an overall like experience in the city that brings people to those places and have them like spend more time here because they think it's interesting and they come for a morning, do something for an afternoon, stay for the evening, and how that kind of like ties in. So that it's not just like, oh, well, it's, you know, where's the trash can placed? But like, why does it matter in the broader scheme of things, and also in the context of our like economic development council strategy? So anyway, so more just like, can we keep the tie-in to things broadly while also in the weeds of the guidelines generally?
I think that fits in well with site design and responding to context well, yeah.
Thank you so much for this presentation. Were you thinking, and I'm not sure if it's appropriate, but for the Arts and Humanities Council, because they have they like to have input on public art, so would that be a council that maybe because I didn't see anything in here about arts and humanities.
We could bring arts and humanities into the fold for the charrette.
Yeah. Just in terms of, I know that they feel very passionate about public art, and I know that's a part of this. And in terms of the goals, so if you could just remind the public, you know, goal 4, I don't really think that you hear. I would bet most of the public doesn't know what city center is. You just don't hear that term much anymore. And so when we talk about that, we're talking about sort of George Mason Square, that area, like where I don't even know exactly what is city center. What would you define that as?
Downtown site plan for a small area plan is what I think of.
Yeah.
So that's a good answer.
Okay. And then, you know, goal 5, I really like the enhance the gateways to the city to make them more attractive and create a distinctive sense of place. I don't know if it's appropriate here, but also one of the things we've been talking about is, you know, there's several places where you come into the city where we don't have that. Like if you're coming on Grove from Haycock, there's no, and then there's also, by Arts House, Lincoln, from Arlington to Lincoln. My point is, not only is it create a sense of place, it also slows down traffic, because you can sort of say you're entering a neighborhood now. So I don't know if you want to actually add that in there, because I think it's like it's a win-win to have that kind of signage. You're creating a sense of place, and you're also informing people like, hey, you're entering a residential area, slow the heck down, you know? So, yeah. But thank you, this is really interesting. Thanks so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Comments or questions over here?
Sure.
Dave?
Thanks very much. First point is the issue of prescriptive versus principles-based, and I think you're moving more toward a principles-based approach.
Correct.
How does that fit into the context of a weakened planning commission as a result of state legislation? In other words, previously we had very broad planning commission authority and a long time for them to operate in comparison, and prescriptive guidelines. If we're moving to principles guidelines, we have to be very careful, however, that the environment, the structure of planning has been dramatically changed by state legislation, both to reduce the role of the Planning Commission and also to create very aggressive timetables. And until that's changed, we need to keep that into account so we don't become so principles-based that there's no effective result. If you had a fully authorized planning commission, as you had before, you could say, well, you could be principles-based, but you had the planning commission there with lots of citizen involvement. You don't have as much of that anymore under state. So that's a general context issue which I think we need to grapple with and hopefully can be raised with the boards and commissions. The second issue is, and here I'm going to make a distinction between resilience and sustainability. The sustainability work generally focuses on what we call in climate areas mitigation. That is, doing those things which slow down or would otherwise positively affect climate change. And that's what sustainability fundamentally deals with. Resilience deals with what's called adaptation, which says, okay, the climate is changing. There are certain threats, certain risks we have today that we didn't have 20 years ago. So I would urge the addition of a section on resilience. And there's a lot of good literature out there from the building industry, from other industries that have an interest in risk, as to some ideas that we might want to incorporate there. But I think that's very important to think not just about what we're building and how it appears, but its ability to contribute to environmental sustainability, but also its ability to best protect our citizens. Now, it does bump up against code, but I think we ought to be talking about code plus in this document.
We will definitely have
it. Specifically with resilience, that is, structures that will withstand different types of natural catastrophes.
There definitely will be a standout section for green building infrastructure, sustainability, and resilience, and we can definitely have that be a standout.
We could have a section on resilience. That would be important. Thank you, especially, again, in the context of climate change and increased risk of natural catastrophes. Those are the 2 points that I wanted to make. And there are a lot of other issues you could talk about. You could talk about parking and how best to provide for walkability and all those other things, but I assume that's not for tonight.
Mary Beth, do you have some?
Thank you. Cameron, taking you back to page 4 of 7, the chart. I'll just reiterate sort of a couple things that Justine said. Some of these things that are old concepts probably are going to end up moving over into revised or expand. And even I think about signs and wayfinding, right? I mean, the picture in the old document is the old sign, and now we have a new sign.
For example, I guess not so literally copy and paste.
Okay.
But for example, the stance on the advocacy for street furniture, for example, guidance hasn't changed in the last so many years. Things like that. So maybe the exact strategies and goals we'll take a look at and see what applies and what needs to be revised, and carrying some of those over. But ultimately, the strategy goal and advice will not change. But photos updated,
Okay.
text definitely updated, because a big portion of it is that we had pages of text on just a small subject like furniture,
Yes.
and we're trying to get down to concise.
Yes,
So,
yes. Okay, that's good. That was sort of what I was envisioning. I was thinking.
Yes.
that It's also really kind of fun to look at the 2001 version and see what worked and what didn't, what got tossed and what didn't, what are the things that matter now that didn't matter in 2001. And then even how our mixed-use buildings have fit in or not fit into those design guidelines, things are a lot more modern now than they were in 2001, and we're okay with that. So I do like this, and I would like to make sure you use the word "wonderf" in here, please.
Oh, yes.
Because that's one of my favorite planning words and mixed-use words, "wonderf." That's like an alleyway.
It's pedestrian.
You don't know what-
or shared street.
Wunderf, I think, is at West Falls. When you
Blocked
go
off,
up the,
yes.
what I used to call the leg day stairs.
Yes.
Next to the daycare, and then there's like string lights across. And that's kind of the Wunderf that I remember EY
Yes.
had pitched to us.
Yes. And then Founders Row supposedly has a winner from West Street into the plaza, but it's,
It was the one on.
Hasn't lived up to
the
its
other
ex-
corner of Broad and Washington that was like, wait a minute, that's an entrance to a garage, not a wall.
anyway, but I think this is great, and I'm glad that a lot of different organizations and viewpoints will be pulled into it. And thank you.
I think everyone's gone. So I will start with some broad comments and then a few specific ones. So one, like everyone else, we're really glad to be taking this on. So thank you, Cameron, for the presentation. I agree that the original urban design guidelines from 01 were definitely too prescriptive and too lengthy. I tried to make my way through them. I think I got 60% through. I actually gave up at gas station canopies.
Yeah.
And I was like, I can't read this anymore. So I guess, given that that's the universal feedback, a thought on kind of who is the end user? And so while we have an approach and we have some thoughts on what we think we need to update and not, I would suggest that we actually talk to the end users of who's ultimately going to use this document and understand from them what they would find helpful in terms of content, length, format, like what things they actually want guidance on so that it does become used. Because my sense is the 110-page document was not being used, which is why we occasionally get feedback that buildings were not meeting design guidelines. Although actually, frankly, if you talk to people who live in those buildings, they actually think their buildings are wonderful. So I don't think it's universal that people don't like our mixed-use buildings and the architecture of them. If you talk to the residents, they love their buildings. So I would suggest that we, as part of the process, talk to the end users and understand kind of what document ultimately would be most useful so that this next time around we actually create something that does get used. And then kind of building off what Aaron said, was like, if this document is supposed to shape kind of what development is going to be, could we also marry it up with what is the vibe we're trying to create? So I know that EDO plus planning is going to work on kind of what our broader economic development strategy is. Like that vibe should weave throughout the document. Rather than to address the concern about principle versus prescriptive. Like if we think prescriptive is actually not going to be useful because it doesn't allow for enough creative flexibility, and I don't have a better word for it than vibe, but whatever the vibe is that we want our urban community to feel like, should feel like it's woven throughout all these different components. And that feels currently, the vibe very much was clear in 2001, which is village. I don't think that is what we are now, so we need a new vibe that weaves through this new version of the document. So that's kind of my first kind of broad feedback. And then just like the RFP, my comment on how do you have it detailed enough that it creates kind of guardrails so people know what to expect, but create enough flexibility so that we are not creating, what's that movie where all the houses look exactly the same?
Truman story.
Yes, Truman story, right? You're not creating kind of a Truman story kind of like community, like the cookie cutter, like.
Yeah.
Because I do, yes, because I do think that since 2001, we've had 25 years of mixed-use development, because 01, I don't think Broadway had even opened yet. We've had 25 years of development in Falls Church now. We've got a pretty eclectic mix of architecture, and then in the past 5 years, we've had this resurgence of what we call adaptive reuse, old buildings that have new life breathed into them. And I think that's actually one of the things that makes us pretty unique, is that we do have kind of like a funkiness in that vibe. Like we have a mix of old and new, not everything gets redeveloped, and that's intentional. And so I would encourage us, again, to maybe not be too prescriptive, to allow for that kind of flexibility, but again, find kind of that economic development vibe that we're trying to create. And then the word that stuck to me is, as I was reading the 01 document, is how do we ensure that this version actually is timeless? Because when you, and maybe I don't know that's possible, maybe things always look dated, but the 01 version felt very, very dated to me. It kind of like old movies in the 90s. Sometimes they are still good after 20, 30 years. The old document, there are many parts of it that did not. And so I would encourage us to think about the design guidelines as something that can be more timeless and enduring, rather than something that really looks out of date within 10 years. So that's kind of broad feedback. Some specific things, if we go to that chart, perfect. I do think that there are probably some things like others, and I won't go into detail now, but that we'll likely want to touch again. So storefront design is one that I think we talked about wanting, like transparency guidelines, or what happens during construction. I think we had a good lesson learned that we don't want vinyl covering up storefronts during construction because we want people to be excited about what's behind them. That feels like a pretty clear guideline that we want to put in there. Another one that I've gotten a lot of feedback about, which is really an evolution in the past several years, is car share and deliveries. I think with the past several mixed-use projects, we have designated areas where people can pull off. That feels like another thing that we've learned in the past 20 years that we want to be maybe more prescriptive on, right? And so maybe that guidance that Dave talked about, when to be principled, when to be prescriptive, depends. There are probably some places where we want to be very prescriptive because we've learned this does not work. We don't want delivery trucks blocking a whole lane of Broad Street. And if those are here to stay, that probably can go in there and be pretty prescriptive, but maybe the vibe and the architecture could be looser and allow for creativity. So car share, accessibility is another one. I think we spent a long time on the accessibility plan. I would like to see that, because we've leaned in so much to our walkability and multimodal that, again, another big selling point in the past 20 years is we really have evolved to be that 15-minute city. So we are very accessible and walkable, and so I would like that to be reflected across all the different concepts. And transparency, I think that's it, though. But overall, I think we're really excited for the work and the approach that you've laid out. And I know that, again, your scope is to try to limit it so that it doesn't become a brand new 110-page document. So I would encourage you that, before you jump in, again, if the end user gives us feedback that says, hey, we really think the most useful version of this is 30 pages, and no more than 30 pages, and it's got to be a lot of images, and these are the categories, that really should be maybe the guiding thing going into this, because I worry that if you just translate everything from yellow over and then add the green stuff, we'll be at 150 pages.
Yeah, and that exact question, which is have the document be concise, but also what born the idea of the developer one-pager. Maybe it's not one-pager, maybe it's a centerfold, but if you could, pull aside a developer and get all the things across you want in a front and back page, what would it be? What would it show? Is it illustrative? Is it text? Is it whatever? So that kind of question is kind of what's driving this project in a lot of ways.
Yeah, if you let us come up with design guidelines, we'll make it probably 100 pages. And so I would work backwards from what is useful, and then what are the must-haves, and maybe there are other things that we can leave more vague.
The other thing that worries me is it's big and it's going to take a lot. I don't want us to say, wait a minute, and just have it go on and on and on as trying to get it done. So maybe there's some phasing or something so that we get version 1 out while we're working on 1.1 or something, so at least we're out the door with something instead of waiting for, so it doesn't take 3 years to get it all done.
Yeah.
Okay, any final thoughts for Cameron? Dave?
Yeah, just one. In thinking about our place in the region, we're not Arlington and Alexandria, but we're not Fairfax County either. And so it would be useful to explore similar documents for similarly situated communities elsewhere to see what may be some ideas we can glean from that in Virginia or elsewhere. It's too easy to say, well, we're like Alexandria. Well, we really aren't. We're like Arlington. Well, we really aren't. We're like Fairfax County. Well, we really aren't. And how we've evolved and where we want to be is relevant and distinct from those other jurisdictions. So it might be useful to try to hunt for some. And I want to go back to the resilience because there is a lot of information from the building industry about resilient construction, everything from the roofs to everything else. And I think in the era of climate change, we really want to build in a resilience element.
And I think to tie into, like you're saying, there's a lot of information about certain topics, and also into a lot of your timelessness comment that talking to DPW of, how do we make sure that we're not constantly updating these standards as things are happening, is to, we can have the vague outline or try to be a little more fluid, but then to reference specific documents like, NACTO guidelines, things like that, which will be the most up-to-date version as it progresses over the years. So to find trusted establishments which we're comfortable directing people towards and referencing them is one way to make sure that the most up-to-date resilient information or streetscape information or whatever is kind of given to developers.
Yeah, there's great information from the building industry, great information from, for example, the Insurance Institute for Building and Home Safety. So there are a lot of good sources for resilience best practices that we can somehow refer to.
Okay, I think that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. We look forward to when you're back.
So we have one item on consent, and that is the annual fuel purchase contract with Mansfield Oil. And it does have a biodiesel component and our unleaded fuel component. When we were doing the budget, there were a lot of questions about fuel prices. We do procure our fuel through cooperative purchasing, so we work with COG on that to get the best price for the city. And asking for this contract to go on consent next week.
I was really interested about the biofuel. Have the school buses always been using biofuel, or is this something?
I'd say for maybe 15 years.
Wow. Did you know that, Mary Beth? Because the only reason I bring it up is because when I was on school board and we were criticized for my last year on school board, we were criticized because instead of buying 2 electric buses, we bought a diesel and an electric because of the cost difference. Because back then, it was like you could get 3 diesels for the price of an electric. But anyway, I didn't know about this biodiesel. That's very interesting to see that the school buses run on that, and that does.
It's not 100% bio, so there's a mix.
Okay.
I can get a little bit more information.
It's just no, you don't. I was just interested. I hadn't heard that. So I mean, whatever. Even if it's not 100%, it's still. Yeah. Reducing emissions and helping the environment in a little bit. So better than just pure diesel chugging buses. Okay, thank you.
No more questions or comments on that? Relatedly, I think we had gotten a comment about schools buying propane buses. FC Can maybe flagged it to us. So I don't know whether that's, I mean, it's not our decision because we don't get to make that capital purchase, but just for staff awareness that we got some public comment that they were concerned about buying propane buses. And I don't know if they're, I assume they're not flammable.
Well, WMATA uses natural gas for its bus system.
It's not propane though.
I don't know exactly what it is, but it's
a kind of gas.
Compressed natural gas.
Well, one general comment is this, I harken back to, I think you had come to say, the threshold for budget approval or contract approvals, and it's like, last time we had the RFP consultant, which was less, and I'm like, I would want to have that as an example of something that does come through us. I look at it and say, this is an example of a contract which, honestly, we've signed off on the budget. I don't feel a need for this to really come through council, but so figuring that out is kind of that balancing act. Right. This is more, this is a great example of dollar amount really isn't the criteria.
So Google says natural gas and propane are different. Natural gas is primarily methane.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, propane is very different. Explosive characteristics are very different.
So methane, we just need to get a bunch of cows and we'll start.
Capture the methane? Okay. Okay. It is 10:30 and we have office hours on Wednesday anyway, so I don't know whether we're going to go through schedule tonight since we will be in City Hall at 9 a.m. anyway, if that's okay with people. Is there any final things to talk about tonight?
Yeah, there was some public comment from Whittier.
About the brick sidewalks.
Yeah.
Site plan says it has to be brick, and why are we removing it and changing it?
So there's been a couple of
From
things.
last century.
So one, staff have been in discussions with Whittier for years on this. And it is our observation, I think, with staff went back out after this winter, they felt like the sidewalks were in worse shape than they had been. And so an intervention, I think, is more of a priority than we have judged it to be in the past. And we have a new sidewalk standard. So we kind of asserted we're going to use the new standard, which I think we have rights to do because it's in the public right of way, even if the site plan said the original installation was different. We're going to work through that a little bit more. I'll keep council informed about our thinking on that. But it was a good point. We got an email about following the site plan, so we need to put our heads together on that.
Relatedly to pavement and disintegrating pavement and whatnot, I can send a picture in of this, but at Broad and Washington on the East Broad Street part of things, when you are walking eastward from the Whole Foods towards Creative Cauldron and Little Beast, the public parking garage entrance and exit now, there are like large square pavers that line the two sides, like the border into the public parking garage, and then the actual brick pavers like start again. Those giant square borders are now like totally all broken, and they're completely uneven, and they're like pedestrian tripping hazards.
And why, if I could, no, we did identify that recently as obviously an ADA and safety issue, and planning has notified the developer because they're responsible for repair. We can check on the timeline. That was about 3 weeks ago, maybe a month now.
All right, thank you.
Any final council requests? Okay, thank you and good night all.
Good night.
Adjourned.
Thank you, council.